Mortis Media.
Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight I have a chilling collection of scary stories for you to dive into, but I would like to give a special shout out tonight to Maltese Mike. I hope you're doing well with your leukemia treatment. Best of luck. I know you're going to come out on top. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This happened when I was on a business trip to Los Angeles. I was staying about an hour's drive from the airport in a place called Anaheim, not too far from Disneyland. It was a pretty nice area and it seemed safe at night too. There were 24-hour convenience stores and good-looking restaurants right by my motel. It was great. I had no problem with the location. I had a problem with the hotel I was staying in. The clerk on the front desk was very nice, but the second I checked into my room, literally the second I touched the keycard to the sensor on the door, something didn't sit right with me. I had a very uncomfortable feel about the room. The hotel room was fine, nice in fact for a business trip. It was just a normal single bed. There was nothing wrong with it, just I didn't like it. I didn't want to be there. I couldn't put my finger on why though. I didn't let it bother me at the time. I went downstairs to grab some dinner in a nearby restaurant. After that, I headed back to my room to go over my notes for the presentation that I would be making the next day. I guess that my initial apprehension to the room was brought on by my work nerves. I was immersed in my preparation when I heard a noise, a creak. I turned my head in the direction of a sound and watched as the bathroom door slowly opened by itself. It felt as if someone were opening it, as if for me to enter, inviting me in, like I was being beckoned. My spine froze. It scared me. I had never experienced anything like this before. My brain went into problem-solving mode. I guess that my senses were heightened because I was in a new place I wasn't used to. For instance, there might be a breeze in the bathroom or a window slightly open. I looked over to the window into the bedroom and saw it as it opened. I smiled and went over and closed it. Problem solved. I went into the bathroom to take a look, and of course there was no one in there. Plus the window was shut tight. I went back into preparing for the presentation. After about 15 minutes, I heard a rattling sound, and then the bathroom door creaked open again. I didn't like it, but I thought it wasn't too much of an issue. I went over and shut it once more. When it happened the third time, I gave up on closing it. If it's open, it can't irritate me, right? Well, that's what I thought at the time. However, the open door started swinging slowly, and then it slammed shut. It opened again and slammed shut. Okay, I can't do this anymore, I thought. Time to call the front desk. I asked to switch rooms, but I was refused quite impolitely. I was told the hotel was fully booked. It certainly didn't seem fully booked. I couldn't do much else. I mean, if the front desk says there aren't any other rooms, then I guess there aren't any other rooms, right? I didn't know the area I was in well enough to be running out and searching for another hotel. Plus, my company booked me to this hotel. How would it look if I ran out on it? With these thoughts in mind, I knew I would have to reluctantly return to my presentation and other less frightening thoughts. I put the phone back on the receiver and started back to the desk when my legs felt trapped. I had no balance. I nearly flew headfirst into my suitcase. It felt as if someone had a hold of my legs, and if they tried to trip me. It was such a frightening feeling. Instinctively, I moved away from the bed. I didn't like the huge gap under it. Now I was starting to feel anxious and frightened, so I called a friend back home and told them what was going on, knowing they wouldn't laugh at me. And my friend gave me some advice. Do you have a Bible in your room? If you do, make friends with it tonight and keep it by your side. I laughed at this idea, but I fished around the bedside chest of drawers to see if there was a Bible, and to my surprise there was. I was flipping through it while chanting to my friend. I flicked through the pages and noticed something strange. In flashes, As the pages sped by, I saw a dark, brownish-reddish stain. I felt sick, as I was certain it was blood. I closed the Bible and saw blood on the edges. You know the white bit around the sides of the pages where they meet? They were clearly blood splattered. I didn't know what happened in that room. I just knew I didn't want to be there any longer. I didn't care what my boss thought. I walked around until I found another hotel. Something was just very wrong there, and I'm thankful that I got away from it. I come from an Indonesian family, one quite proud of its roots, and one always keen to latch onto something closely related to Indonesian history. When I was much younger, my mother had bought a wayang doll. Used to be used for puppet theatres in Indonesia, and are said to have their own personality and vices. The doll quickly becomes the pride and joy in our house, a centerpiece on the mantel, smiling and looking over the room at all times. It had stood there for a year, with never any bother. That was until my mum started seeing her now husband. The doll quickly got an eerie feeling to it, but nothing too unusual. When things got serious between my mother and stepdad, and he moved in, things started to get a bit freaky. It started off with picture frames falling off the walls and mantelpiece. Initially, not thinking much of it, just kept putting everything back in its place. Slowly, I kid you not, the face of the doll turns its grin into a frown, turned unpleasant to look at, but still all seemed innocent. One night, we had all gone to bed. Normally we had candles on the mantelpiece, blew them out, and went upstairs. An hour or so later, smoke started to creep upstairs. My mother let out a yelp calling us down. The doll was on fire, having its arms stretched out in flames, no candle lit, a completely dark room aside for the doll. It cast the scariest shadow on the wall before my mum threw a bucket of water over it. Through all of this, to this day, it still sends a shiver running down my spine. We got a family member to get rid of the remains, and never saw it again after that night. My parents are divorced, and I switched off between parents every Monday. My dad just picked me, a 15-year-old female, up from my mum's. It was around 11:30 a.m., and I hadn't eaten lunch yet, so my dad suggested we go to Panda Express. We get in the drive-thru and I hear the usual, "Hi, my name's Rachel, how can I take your order?" It didn't sound like a robot, she sounded human, and my dad tells the woman our order, and she doesn't respond. We sit there for 2 minutes before my dad asks, "Hello, are you there?" But there's no answer. And we sit there for another minute before pulling up to the window to see if there's anyone there, but no one is. We see no one in the restaurant. The lights are all on, the window is closed, and the computer is on, but no one's there. We sit there for another 3 minutes to see if anyone walks in or out, but nothing. My dad claims he saw someone walk in, but I don't know about that, considering the fact that we saw no one in the restaurant. We joke around saying how the store is getting robbed, or the people in there got murdered. But after a few minutes of joking, we realize that those are very real possibilities. My dad calls 911 to report it and see if they can check it out, and we ended up going to Lee's and getting a few burgers. After we drove back by the Panda Express, we see people peering through the window and trying to open the doors. The doors were locked and they couldn't get in, but the store was open. It wasn't like it was closed and we just came at the wrong time. 5.5 hours later, we drive back to look at the Panda Express. The police aren't there. There's still no one in the store and people are at the drive-thru line just sitting there. We drove by 5 times each time and we saw no one. There were no workers in the kitchen. Cleaning, no one. I still have no idea what happened, but I think there was a robbery or a murder or something. The entire thing was bizarre, and I'm pretty sure I heard a woman's last words. There was nothing on the news, and we didn't get an update. I recently moved out in the middle of nowhere. I was about 5 minutes away from home when I stopped at a stop sign to look for a lighter in my purse. I noticed a man walking towards my car from the tree line and immediately drove off. It was pretty late at night, and my closest neighbour is about 10 minutes out from where I am. It's all woodland and farms. There's no good reason the man should have been out in the middle of nowhere like that. I picked up my neighbour, who lives a few miles away, who had a couple of young daughters himself, and we went out to look for the man after reporting it to the police. We never found him, but there were footprints all around the tree line. I never got out of the car, but my neighbour, who was properly armed and protected, spent a good 30 minutes searching the area. A few months rolled around, and they found the guy living on private property, along with another man. They had been kidnapping young women for months, and eating them alive / selling them on the black market. They used an abandoned shed as a slaughterhouse and had meat hooks hung everywhere. They found a missing woman naked and locked in a cage, and authorities believed dozens of the missing women cases ended up there. It freaked me out for a while and still does. Being a woman, I'm usually extra careful anyway, but I definitely felt like this was a wake-up call to be extra precautious. I remember getting the Amber Alerts at least once every other week, all with the same description. Long brown hair, around 5'3", blue eyes. I have long brown hair, and 5'2" and have blue eyes. Really creepy. After this happened, I made a point to become very familiar with firearms. I'm originally from Chicago, so that's saying something. Crime in the city is predictable. Crime in the South is straight up out of a horror movie. I used to work at a summer camp. Usually the kids would go to bed by 9 p.m. at the least, so the rest of us would just hang out around the fire. One night one of the kids came to the fire pit, which was about 100 yards from the cabin, saying that she was having trouble sleeping because of the noise. So I walk back with her and make sure everything is good in the cabin, and come back to tell everyone to keep it down. Maybe 10 minutes later she comes back and says that she still can't fall asleep. I walk back with her again, and in my head I'm thinking that she's just being restless because we aren't being loud. But anyway, I make sure she's under the covers and head back to the fire pit. Just as I'm about to get there, I realize that I left my walkie-talkie in her room. So I head back there and see that she's sitting upright in bed with the walkie-talkie in her hand. I'm thinking, okay, whatever, and tell her to go to sleep. I head back to the fire pit, and the guys are like, "Why did you say that to her?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And they're like, "We heard you on the walkie-talkie tell her that she would look better if she shaved her head. That all the girls look better with shaved heads." I never said that, but no one believed me. And it was obvious not her saying it either, since it was a grown man's voice. I rushed back to check on the cabin, and everything was normal. This story happened at my old house in Toronto. 3 of us lived on the main floor of our house, and a stranger lived in the basement. We didn't know much about the guy in the basement, beside he was a big gamer and smoked an awful lot of weed. Almost every night we could hear him coughing up a storm, as if he were about to die. I could hear this quite often. I began to realize that this wasn't really directly below my room. He appeared to be coughing in a room under our garage. Sure enough, my roommate and I went into the garage and jumped up and down and could hear the hollow room below us. Eventually this guy decided to move out, and we were able to move our friend into the basement. It would be our first time down there, and I was excited to see this weird room under the garage. Our friend took us to the laundry room, which was under my room, where we discovered a creepy little red door that led to a cement-filled room with trash and old furniture. It was basically a dungeon. Was this where he smoked weed every day? It was full of mold and seemed dangerous to breathe in the air. Not the exciting room we'd hoped for. Our friend didn't understand our need to see the room because he was pissed off at the state of the apartment. I was surprised, since it appeared the other guy moved out and our friend moved right in the day after. Not too much to clean. But then my friend told me the guy had been calm for 2 weeks already and no one cleaned it. I thought about this for a moment and immediately got a cold chill down my neck. The last 2 weeks this guy was gone, I could still hear the horrible coughing coming from that creepy room. I used to work for my dad, who was partially self-employed doing regular maintenance and floor refinishing for a childcare program called Head Start. The one centre was in an old school which was built not long after the turn of the century and served as a church functions building in addition to housing Head Start and another childcare. We always did floors over the summer. Anyone who's stripped and waxed floors knows that when you're putting the coating back on, it's quiet and relaxing. We were the only people in the building since it was midsummer weekend, and yet it felt off, even before you entered, like something was watching you from the second floor windows. So here we are, slowly progressing across this huge room, when we hear a thunk upstairs and then stop. Then it sounded like someone was skipping across the room and back, and then it stopped again. So we finished the layer and went upstairs. Mind you, the upstairs was a few classrooms with shelves, blocking direct movement from one end to the other, filled with supplies from the other classes. No one was up there, so we closed the doors and went downstairs to start the other room. Once again, this sound started, but this time I sprinted upstairs. The sound stopped before I reached the hall, but all the doors were open at various angles. We didn't hear the sound anymore that summer, but my dad asked the childcare advisor from the other end of the building if they heard any weird noises. She said no, but that one day they were sitting down for snacks and a few kids were staring in a corner. The aide asked them what they were looking at, and one of the kids asked, "Why can't the girl eat with us?" The aide looked around and asked, "What girl?" And the kid pointed to the corner and said, "The little girl with the white dress." I literally haven't set foot in the building since, and I have no desire to do so. I used to think ghosts were for scary stories, but I have trouble believing this isn't real. There was an inn in my hometown. It was built in the 80s when Japan's economy was skyrocketing. Leisure resorts and the tourism industry all thrived back then. After that period in our history, the inn suffered a decline in popularity, possibly due to increased tourism abroad and the fact that inns like this went out of style. Eventually, the lot and the inn were bought by a development company, and the inn finally and permanently closed its doors. Someone had heard that the plot was to be used to create a relaxation resort. The odd thing was that the company that bought the inn and the land went bust. History repeated itself, I guess. Before development could begin, their bubble burst. No company or anyone got involved with the inn and the plot of land, and therefore lay there derelict and only served a purpose, a gloomy monument to its former glory. The inn wasn't exactly in the public eye. Back in the day, there were signposts pointing guests towards it from the highway. Now, the darkness, weeds, and dense overgrowth had claimed the inn. If you weren't looking for it, you'd never find it. That in itself is a double-edged sword, I suppose. You wouldn't find a business sign for the inn nowadays. All you'll see is an ominous dark outline if you perchance glanced out your passenger side window as you drove past it. It was around this time when the rumours about the inn began to spread. There was no doubt the rumours were born from the fact that it had become a frightening-looking building, and not through any substantial evidence. In short, people said the place was haunted. One rumour started that the owner took his life when his business went under, and that if you went to visit, you may see his spirit at night. Another rumour said there was a murder that happened in the building. But of course, as we knew the real history of the inn, these were nothing but baseless rumours. I know that the owner sold the inn at the best possible chance before the bubble bursts, and that he was living very comfortably these days. There was no suicide or murder either. The locals usually know the stories which are behind abandoned buildings, but people who just see a derelict building presume they have the right to come up with their own truths. However, Some of the locals have said that they have seen a pale light emanating from the inn, and that they have seen shadows pass by the window. That's pretty creepy, right? The owner of that mysterious shadow was likely an urban explorer, and that spooky glow of pale light, his flashlight. Because of rumors like this place has become supposedly haunted. It was actually featured in a magazine and I couldn't believe it. The article interviewed an individual who had witnessed paranormal activity there. The interviewee was adamant that he saw an apparition in the inn. After this publicity, the inn gained a lot of popularity. Young people would turn up at all hours of the night, making noise and flashing their flashlights everywhere. It annoyed us locals so much that there were requests to demolish the building, to stop the nuisance that it caused. Then as time went by, the day of the demolition came, and the creepy abandoned inn was no more. It was said that there would be a shopping centre erected in its place. I don't know why, but I was kind of sad to see it go. I guess that seeing it daily for 10 years or so does that. A few days after the demolition work began, I saw police cars parked outside the abandoned inn. I wondered if there'd been a car accident or something. Later that night I was watching the local news and found out why the police cars were gathered there. You see, during the demolition, they found the skeletonized remains of a body. Initial reports concluded that the person had passed away between 6 to 10 years ago. Well, that coincides perfectly with when all the rumors began. I guess sometimes there is a truth in rumors. Perhaps they did see someone, and something paranormal was happening in that inn. But I'll never know for sure. It's certainly creepy, though. My boyfriend Luke and I went on holiday to Mexico in April 6 years ago. Upon coming back, I was going through our suitcase to wash various items of clothing and came across a tiny statue of what looked like a woman on her knees praying to the sun. Okay. I asked Luke about this, and he said that him and another guy from the group of friends that we went with were out and saw it leaning against a tree stump. Him, being him, thought that this statue was the best thing since sliced bread, and he shoved it in his suitcase to bring it home with us. I thought this was weird, as the statue itself was made from wood and wasn't very flattering. Luke placed it on the table in the hallway, in between our Yankee candles. I'd say about a week later, I was coming downstairs through the hallway and into our living room, when I noticed that it seemed colder by the table. I took this to there being a draft coming in from the front door, and made sure I shut the living room door behind me, in an attempt to keep it from coming in there. Small things started to happen. My keys, that I always put on a hook in the kitchen, would be in the middle of the living room floor, resting on the rug when I would wake up. We have no pets, and I know Luke wouldn't do something so petty to try and mess with me. I had to keep changing light bulbs in the hallway. The phone, that was also on this table, would go off randomly at all times of the day. I'd answer and hear static. Sometimes I'd hear faint mumbling over it. There were times when I would get ready for bed and just about to lay my head down on the pillow, and I'd pull out that wooden statue. Somehow it had made its way under my pillow, and this happened at least 5 to 7 times. I was home alone one night, watching TV in the living room, when I saw a shape of black smoke in the hallway lingering there, as if it were watching me. It was in the TV reflection. I dared not move my head towards it, and acted like I was totally engrossed in the show I was watching. I could see it from the corner of my eye though, but was too afraid to move. I saw it slowly fade away and move further into the hallway. Me being a big baby, I didn't move and carried on watching my show. I brushed it off, with that if I show no interest, perhaps it would go away. When my boyfriend got home, I asked him if he wanted to go grab McDonald's to get a McFlurry. He jumped at the chance. I wanted to get out of the house to talk about what I saw. Sitting there in the car park, I blurted out the events of the night. He sat quietly. I expected him to not believe me and laugh. But Luke said that he had seen the smoke too, but sometimes it was in the doorway when he woke up. He would rub his eyes and it would still be there, then vanish. We thought about the timeline and realized that all of this happened shortly after finding the statue in the suitcase. That night when we got back, we took the statue into the garden and burnt it. Nothing happened since, and the house somehow feels lighter and warmer. I'm a 16-year-old girl and work as a waitress at a restaurant. There are a lot of other girls around my age who also work as waitresses. Each waiter/waitress has a certain section of tables to serve. I haven't worked here for very long, but worked here long enough to manage a section on my own. I'm fairly friendly with my co-workers, so when one of the janitorial workers would make small talk with me, I didn't think anything of it. He'd talk to me fairly often, as I would often see him working in my section when I'd come out to clear tables. I figured it was pure coincidence. I was taking a break in the back room eating my dinner, when the janitor guy walked in and sat down at the table behind me. He sat again, made small talk, literally nothing super important, and as I inhaled my pancakes, one of the other girls walked in and we began to chat for a while. The janitor left about 5 minutes into me and the other girl's conversation, and I again didn't think anything of it. While I was cleaning up, I thanked the girl for talking to me and she said, "Oh, I just came in to make sure you weren't alone. No one should be alone with him." I later learned from the other teenage girls that the guy had a habit of pestering them, being generally creepy, and following them to their car while he was a middle-aged man. I was freaked out and of course, looking back, I'm 80% sure the dude was following me around while I worked in my section. So to the creepy janitor dude, please get lost. I'll start at the beginning of the worst day and a half of my life. Right now I'm a female at 31. At the time this happened, I had just turned 22. I got off work early from my second job. The cool breeze kissing my face, cooling me down as I drove up the long driveway. It was so calming. My husband and I at the time lived on this ranch that we also worked on. It was dark, desolate, and just had a completely different feel at night. The creatures of the night howling and chirping, the shadows of all the trees dancing in the headlights. Then there's our house smack dab in the middle of it, the forest unraveling around it as far as you can see. I made it to my front porch, and something just felt off. I can't explain it, but I soon found out when I walked in there. They were there, on the couch, completely naked. The next hour was a complete blur of shouting, crying, and him begging me to listen. I just couldn't, not again. This was the end of us. I packed up everything I could in my small black Honda, spiraling gravel into the house, and sped back down the same driveway I had just not too long before been so serenely driving home on. It was about a 4-hour drive back to my dad's house, my safe space. I wanted my dad, reverting back to my 10-year-old self, longing for my dad to fix my proverbial boo-boos. I drove on, determined, into the night, and everything was going smoothly, until I was almost back to my hometown. You see, my gas gauge hadn't worked in a long time, and through the horrible situation I just endured doing laps in my head and had forgotten to fill up before I left. The car started to sputter and cut out in the absolute worst of places possible. I was on a 3-lane highway at 3 in the morning, and the only place to pull my car over was a tiny bike lane butted up to a retaining wall. I was screwed. There was no one on the highway at this time, and if there were, they weren't going to stop for me. I put my hazards on, but that was just a band-aid for the moment. A couple of semis had passed me in the 10 minutes or so that I had become stranded. They barely saw me in time to move over. They passed so close that my entire car shook. It shook so hard that the crack in my front windshield started to spread haphazardly across it. I was scared at this point, and I didn't know what to do. Suddenly, I saw a car on the opposite side of the highway slow down and make an illegal U-turn across 3 desolate lanes. The small SUV pulls up next to my window. In the car were 2 young males in their teens and what looked to be like their young girl companions. The guy driving asked me what happened. I gave them a brief rendition of the story, and he then offered to drive me to the nearest petrol station. I was hesitant at first, but quickly realizing my current situation, I reluctantly obliged. We made it to the parking lot of a Wally World, which I thought was odd. I dare not question it yet. I held onto my purse closely, trying not to draw attention to the nervous sweat beading down my brow. The driver then tells me his friends have somewhere to be, and they all but the driver just exit the car without rhyme or reason, leaving me alone with the young male driver. He tells me that he'll quickly take me to the gas station, and now a small sense of relief comes over me. Then quickly fades. Because I knew this town, I had grown up here, and he was not heading towards any gas station. The young man, which I did not get a name of, suddenly turns down a dark, dimly lit alleyway and just parks the car and says, nonchalantly, "Hey, I just need to park here for a minute and take my insulin," insinuating he's diabetic. It wasn't insulin. It looked dirty. It was drug paraphernalia. I've seen enough cops to know what they look like. At that moment, my heart sank to my buttocks. I said to him, can you just take me back to my car, please? I'll figure it out." He didn't respond. Just then, I caught a glimpse of 2 skinny men clumsily trying to duck behind a dumpster behind us in the alley. I was naive enough to bring this up to my unwanted capture. He said in a menacing tone, "I don't know what you're talking about. You're tripping, girl." I instantly went into fight or flight mode. I started telling him my tragic life story, like how my brother had killed himself, and I was all my dad had left. He even tried to shush me. I kept talking, told him about my cheating husband, and the fact that I just wanted to get home and be with my dad. For a moment he paused and looked at me, and then something clicked in his brain. Before I knew it, he was speeding off to the poorly lit alleyway into the scorching lights of the highway and the Walmart across the street. He screeched to a stop in front of my car, threw out my purse and a random half-full gas can from behind his seat, and uttered the words, which I will never forget, that are seared into my brain. "Don't ever get into someone's car you don't know. Now get the hell out of here." And he sped off down the highway, vanishing forever. There are so many things I wish I did differently, but thinking back, I'm alive. And it could have been much worse. I, for one, will never be the same because of it. I worked at a Boy Scout camp for 2 years in high school as a summer gig. A requirement for the Scouts is to earn their Wilderness Survival Merit Badge, and for this, they had to set up shelters along with other activities. Before I was staff, the Scouts would go 12 miles into the woods for their night out to a place called Shelby's Dream. The stories of kids waking up screaming, talking about seeing a ghost running at them and being hung from trees and other wild experiences were many. Everyone wrote those kids off and called them crazy. Eventually there were things people couldn't explain, such as staff members waking up with scratches and cuts on their body. The backstory of the place is that there was a mass killing of Southern soldiers during the American Civil War, and Shelby was the daughter of the Southern captain, who was hung with all his men. She supposedly came back to the camp to find her father and all his men hung from the trees. We stopped sending the group to that location a few years back. One night my cabin mates and I went out there to see if the rumors were true about that place. I heard voices, cries, and screams that echoed into the forest. There's a point where you cross a bridge, and once over the bridge the wilderness stops. The woods continue, but there's no noise for animals or insects. Absolute silence, and it's one of the creepiest things I've ever experienced. I grew up on an island in Alaska, and I lived on the same property since birth to high school graduation. Our house was 2 stories, and the downstairs had a bathroom, furnace room, storage room, entryway, and rec room. One of the walls had some plywood pieces up so that we could feed extension cords through it into our crawl space. We had a C-shaped driveway that you would enter from one side and then park in the carport and then just drive forward towards the exit. The crawl space consisted of 2 big water tanks because we caught our own rainwater and used this area for storage. This space was 10 by 15 but only 3 foot high. You had to lift a cover up to get into the water tanks, and you could only enter the crawl space from the side of the house. It was a 2 by 2 door that we kept a master lock on, but never actually locked it. Our dog Brewster's area was on this side of the house as well. He had a big fenced area, his own stairway and porch, which was half covered, and he had a doghouse. Brewster weighed about 130 pounds, was a fantastic dog who only barked when necessary. During the summer, we had black bears in our yard most nights, and Brewster would give a quick bark to get them on their way, and we knew his barks. There are 4 of us in our family: my parents, myself, and my older brother, who is 2 years older and has Down syndrome. My brother was in special education at school, and there were other kids who would come into the same room, but just once in a while throughout the day because they had a smaller disability and were able to keep up in some general classes, but some of the kids had discipline problems or mental illnesses. My brother was loved by the kids in school, and everyone knew him. One day, a native kid that was about 15 came to our door and wanted to play with Travis. We thought it was odd because Travis has moderate Downs, and he didn't really like playing with other kids. He liked watching kids play. Travis liked watching movies and listening to music, and my mum asked the kid what his name was, and he said that he was Mark, and that he knew Travis from junior high the year before, because he would go into Travis's class sometimes to help him with his schoolwork. I remember him staring at me a little bit too much, and he didn't seem like someone who was mentally challenged. My mum let him come in but kept a watchful eye. Travis seemed like he didn't want him there, and my mum told Mark that we were having dinner soon and that it was time for him to go. My mum found out that he had moved into the area where we lived, but it was still a little ways away. He had been in and out of foster care most of his life. His parents were abusive addicts, and I think he came over another time and my mum felt bad for him, but she always felt like something was off, like he was coming over because of me. My mum politely told him that Travis didn't really want having visitors over, and he seemed okay with that and never returned. My parents went to a church service on Wednesday evenings and would always be gone a few hours. I would stay home with Travis. At the time, I was 11 and he 13, and I started helping out in the church nursery when I was 9. And when I turned 11, my best friend and I took a babysitting course, which included CPR and first aid. We would babysit together at age 12 and started babysitting on our own. My mum was a homemaker and was always home except for Wednesday's church service. My parents didn't drink, do drugs, or smoke, and I can only remember my parents going out a few times when we needed a babysitter. I would leave the downstairs doors unlocked for my parents when they were going to be gone a few hours. I was expecting them home in about a half hour and was surprised when I heard the downstairs door open, and I thought I must not have heard the car pull up, and Travis was up past his bedtime, so I quietly tell Travis to go to his bedroom and to get into bed. I start walking through the kitchen to the top of the stairs and I call out, "Mum? Dad?" And I hear the footsteps stop, and I'm looking down the stairs, and I think I could see men's work boots and jeans. These aren't my parents. The way the stairs were set up, you could only see the bottom half of someone without descending the stairs. I'm scared to death, and I turn to Travis, who is going down the hall, and I drag him and grab him to my parents' bedroom, because it's the only room that locks, has a phone and rifles. Down kids are very stubborn, so my brother just wants to go to his room, but I get him to sit down on the bed. I'm trying to keep him in the room while I grab a gun. I'm trying to call my neighbor, and I can hear him walking around downstairs still. My neighbor answers her phone immediately, and I whisper that someone was in my house and I was scared. She told me to come out the front porch and she'd be there. I get the courage to run to the door and get outside. Thankfully, she's in the driveway and has her dog with her. She lets me know that she's going to enter the house through the downstairs, and she disappears from sight but comes back quickly and tells me the door is locked, and she makes her way up the stairs, gets to the top when she hears the downstairs door open and the crunching of gravel as the intruder is running off. She lets go of her dog's leash and the dog chased the person into the woods. The dog came back 10 minutes later, and our neighbor sat with us until my parents got home. The police were never called because I think my parents assumed it was a neighborhood boy screwing with me, and we lived in a safe place where you just had to worry about bears and an occasional wolf. A week after this incident, our dog would bark 15 minutes after we went to bed every night. We would look out the window and never see anything. We figured it was bears because it was springtime and Brewster was probably just getting used to them again. A few months the barking still happened, and I had my best friend stay the night, and we would always lay in the downstairs so that we could be louder and stay up as late as we liked. Kate had a brother that was 7 years older, and we asked if he'd bring us some booze. I knew we were young, but that was the normal thing for our town. Kids started drinking, smoking, and doing it in the middle of school because of boredom. I think we got 13 feet of rain that year, so we would be inside a lot. It was a little after midnight, and her brother never showed up, and Brewster never barked that night either. We were sitting on the stairs braiding each other's hair when we both got a feeling of someone staring at us, and we looked over and a guy was staring into the window. We ran up the stairs in panic. We thought maybe it was her brother, but he wouldn't have come up to the window to spy on us like that, and the face seemed too dark to be his. But we had the lights on in the downstairs, and there were no lights by that window outside, so it's hard to tell who it was. We didn't want to wake my parents up just in case it was her brother, and we waited 30 minutes and worked back down to grab her stuff, and went to sleep in my bedroom for the night. The next day we spoke to her brother and it wasn't him, and that night, Brewster's nightly barking resumed. 2 more months go by, and I had gone to bed and heard Brewster bark when I looked out my window as usual and saw nothing. I had just dozed back off and woke up to Brewster barking frantically. I look up my window and see a guy running out of our driveway. I thought about walking into my parents' room, but we had a trail on the side of our house that kids used to get to the road behind us. The neighborhood was on the side of a mountain, so all the kids used trails to go through to another road instead of using the main road. I had never seen someone come out of another part of the driveway, because the trail was on the south side of the house along with the crawl space and Brewster's area. My room was the only room on the north side. I decided to go back to sleep, and as I was tossing and turning, 15 minutes go by when I smell smoke. I go to the hall and the smell is a lot stronger, and it's starting to get hazy in Travis's room, which was directly across from mine. I begin screaming fire, and my parents are up, and Travis doesn't want to get out of bed, but thank God for the strength of adrenaline. We get outside and the flames were pouring out of the crawl space. We get Brewster out of his enclosure, and the neighbors all come out to help us. The firemen were rather quick, but the fire had destroyed the crawl space in my parents' and Travis's bedrooms. Thankfully, the firefighters got the fire extinguished and no one was physically hurt. This was one of the scariest nights of my life, though. I'll always remember the fire chief kneeling down to speak to me after he had talked to my parents when he said, "Melinda, we believe it was arson." I look at him with tears streaming down my face and I say in anger, "Who is arson?" And everyone started laughing so hard. And I'm thinking now how funny that was. That damn arson could have killed my family. So he explains what arson is, and I'm still friends with the old fire chief's son, and I share that story with him often, because his father passed away from cancer when we were teens. His father is the only happy memory I have from that horrific night. The island I grew up on had a city and a village out south. We lived out south, but before the village. We had firemen from out south, north, and the city. We had state troopers from the island and city cops in the city limits. My mum took my brother and I to our family friend's house, and my dad dealt with the fire officials and the state troopers that showed up after. After the investigation, my family, neighbours and the firemen pieced together that a person had been living in our crawl space for 4 months. We knew he had set the house on fire on purpose. He used a box of matches. My mum said the first odd thing she noticed that night was the smell of sulphur. We knew who did it. It was Mark. His uncle was one of the firemen who first showed up at our house and saw him standing near our driveway watching. My mum had told him my description of what the person was wearing that I saw fleeing our house, and it was what he was wearing. Behind our house near the crawl space area, my dad found where he hung out when he wasn't in the crawl space. There were a bunch of cigarette butts, soda cans, which we also found in the crawl space, but because our crawl space wasn't locked, our insurance policy wouldn't have paid for the repairs. Because of our water tanks, the space was supposed to be locked. So my parents never said anything to the police, and the firemen never said anything. By pursuing this, we could not have a home, a house my father had built. It took 4 months for our house to be repaired, and it smelt like ozone years later. What bothers me the most is knowing he had seen me and my friends undress numerous times while changing in the rec room during tons of sleepovers. Where he had set up shop was right next to the plywood with the holes drilled through. He listened to all our secrets, and I never explained to my friends that he had seen us and heard us during our sleepovers because I didn't want them to feel sick to their stomachs, like I still do. I still have issues when it comes to being home alone. I can't sleep if I'm the only adult in the house, and I keep the volume on everything very low, and I'm scared to shower. I like to be able to see the front door, and I have night terrors to this day. I'm 34 now, and I've been dealing with anxiety since the fire and panic attacks since I was 18, and recently have been diagnosed with PTSD. When the intruder was in his early 20s, he was caught for burning down a few houses and was put in jail. All my childhood toys were stored in the crawl space, along with a lot of our family's sentimental possessions. I've been dealing with a possible neurological condition for the past year, and I lose my train of thought easy and struggle to find words that are simple. Thank you all so much for listening. I went to a Catholic school, and we had a school chaplain who was essentially some sort of friend to the kids. It sounds really creepy when you say it like that, but the dude was goddamn amazing. He talked multiple students out of suicide, helped tons of kids come to terms with and overcome bullying, harassment, and sexual/domestic abuse, as well as encouraging every single student to reach for their dreams. Anyway, he once went the extra mile for a very troubled family at my school. The two kids in question were adopted brothers, and both incredibly unstable. The brothers would be your best friend 1 second and then suddenly fly off the handle the next, making you literally fear for your own life. Anyway, knowing their family problems, the school chaplain volunteered to become the two boys' godfathers in order to legally be able to help them and their family out financially. About a year after I finished school, the school chaplain appeared in the local newspapers. He had been arrested for imprisoning and raping the older of the two lads. For most people, that was enough to condemn him, but most of the people I went to school with found the whole thing somewhat suspicious. Whenever someone encountered one of the two boys, they would instantly launch into a step-by-step recount of exactly what happened, as if desperate to convince everyone they knew that they were telling the truth. The only thing wrong was that these step-by-step accounts were usually vastly different each time they were told, as if poorly thought out. Regardless, the chaplain imprisoned and eventually died of cancer while still inside. It was only after his death that it finally came out that the rape never happened. The chaplain had run into financial trouble himself, and so was unable to keep giving the boy's family money. As punishment, the whole family, yes, the parents were the ones who came up with the idea, invented the story of rape to teach him a lesson. The guy was a hero. He even helped my girlfriend at the time get through her parents' divorce in one piece. And yet, his lot in life wound up with him sad, forgotten, name besmirched, and alone, to die of cancer in prison. This happened around 10 years ago, and is something that regularly plays on my mind. I think it happened just past 1 a.m. I was falling asleep, but then I was awoken by the sound of something heavy and metallic clanking against something. It was stressful to be woken up like that, and I was laying in bed wondering what had happened. Not 30 seconds had passed when I heard the sound again. Since I had another chance to hear the sound, I now thought that it sounded like a metal pole or rod smashing against something heavy and dense. It continued. It seemed like it was occurring every 30 seconds or so. I had to take a look outside. It was so weird and I was very curious. My bedroom was on the second floor and it faced the street. I lived in a residential area back then. It was usually very quiet, especially this late at night. We didn't get much noise from traffic passing either, so it was very odd. I was looking out the window, and for a while I couldn't even figure out where the noise was coming from. It looked as if there were no one on the streets. Well, that's what I thought, until I spotted a figure standing in the middle of the road about 3 houses away. It was a man. He was slightly illuminated between the yellow streetlights. I wondered if he lived in one of the houses that he stood in front of. I hadn't seen him before, and based on the way he stood like a statue in the street, I wouldn't mind not seeing him again either. He was creeping me out. At the man's feet were about 5 garbage bags, all black. They seemed to surround him. It was strange because in our area, we were told by the council to use a yellowish garbage bag. The trash collection workers said if they were not in a yellow bag, they wouldn't take them. This, to me, was a red flag. This is where things get really weird. I thought at one point the garbage bags he was standing over sort of looked like a body. I must have stared at the man for about 10 to 15 minutes, and he didn't move a muscle. The metal sound stopped after a while, and I was too tired to figure out what was happening there, so went to bed. I woke up the next morning late for work, and headed out in a rush. It wasn't until dark when I returned. Just as I was turning my key in the lock, I remembered the events of the night before. My brain literally said, what was going on with the guy last night under the streetlight? I looked across at the home that the man was seemingly stood in front of. Strange thing was, it was pitch black out, and I couldn't see the house I had seen the night before. I was freaked out because I knew I saw the man last night standing in front of a house on my street. Now I couldn't even make out where it was he once stood. Then I figured out why I couldn't see him. There was no streetlight anywhere near that house. I ran upstairs and looked out my window thinking that my eyes had deceived me. But when I pulled the curtain back, my spine went ice cold. There was no streetlight opposite that house. I don't care what anyone says. I saw that man under a yellow streetlight in front of the house. I know it wasn't a dream, and I still have no idea how that happened. All I know is that my life went downhill fast after I laid eyes on him. If anyone has any theories, I'm all ears. I can't get that night out of my head. A puppet, almost identical to this. I was a big Pee-wee fan and loved it at first. In my room I had bunk beds, and I slept on the bottom bunk, and in the top bunk I kept all of my favourite toys and stuffed animals. I'd often leave them in really weird formations after having battles and the like, but I always remembered to leave certain ones in certain places because they were my favourites, namely my Ninja Turtles and Pee-wee. A few months after getting this toy though, I started to have some really terrible nightmares about it. Not the "are you afraid of the dark" kind of 90s nightmares for kids, but truly graphic and horrible dreams where someone had broken into our house and made me watch him torture my sisters and my parents while the doll just laughed. You know, scarring stuff. So I told my parents and they immediately got rid of it. This apparently just meant they hid it in the garage, since I couldn't see the stuff stored up that high anyway. A few weeks later, I woke up to all my Ninja Turtles on the floor. Confused, but maybe I shook the bed a bunch in my sleep. And a few days after this, my older sister woke my parents up screaming about a dream she had. It was nearly identical to the dream I had told them about, but I knew she'd never heard it. My parents knew this too, and my mother looked genuinely horrified. I got screamed at for telling my sister about such horrible things, but once it became clear that I really hadn't told her, my mum got even more concerned. I watched her go into the garage, grab Pee-wee, put him in a trash bag, and put him in the dumpster. For years I'd wake up and my stuffed animals would be in really odd places, in places I knew I hadn't left them, in places I would never have left them. I was obsessed. When I was 12, I found Pee-wee in a toy box in the garage. My mum said my dad must have come home, seen it in the trash and pulled it out, but he doesn't remember ever doing that. He swears he didn't even know she threw it away, let alone try to pull it out. So I was about 7 years old when this happened. My dad and I had stopped at a fast food restaurant in a pretty shady area because he had to use the bathroom. There weren't that many people dining in there, and the restrooms were in the very back, like in most fast food places. My dad told me to stay at the table right outside the bathroom and that he'd be right back. I wasn't too worried because although I didn't like being left alone, my dad always made sure to be super quick in public bathrooms so that I wouldn't be left alone for too long. But almost immediately, after he went in, I felt eyes on me and noticed there was a small group, maybe of 3 to 5 older men, all in their late 50s, sitting a few tables away. They were all staring at me simultaneously without speaking, and I remember feeling kind of scared because it was so odd, even as a little kid who didn't really know what was going on. So one of them says fairly loudly, and I remember this so vividly, "Wow, look at that pretty little girl over there all alone. We should do something about that." And they all burst out laughing. I felt so much dread at this point. I didn't know what they meant, but I knew they were bad. Fortunately, my dad came out moments later. I whispered something to him that I don't remember, but I think he could tell something was wrong by how scared I looked. And without saying anything, he walked out with me, and we rushed to the car. We never talked about it, but after that day, my dad would always take me into the public bathrooms with him. I know this might not be the creepiest story, but it was scary enough that combined with some other experiences, I don't think I can ever fully 100% trust a man to not be creepy or want to hurt me. So, everlasting trauma is certainly fun. I service firefighting breathing air compressors and was on a service call in the northwest of Pennsylvania. I was running a bit late, so it was dark when I left the fire station, as this was in February about 15 years ago. As I drove down this twisty rural 2-lane, I passed a Dodge Durango on the side of the road with its headlights on. It wasn't near any houses, just in a wide spot, so I thought maybe they'd broken down or gotten a flat. I slowed down and went behind the Durango to see a shape lying on the ground. I thought it might be a driver trying to get the spare wheel out from under the vehicle, but then I realized it was a man on top of a woman holding her down and apparently trying to strangle her. I had to drive about a quarter of a mile further before I found a spot to turn around. I was in a 16-foot box van, so I couldn't just do a U-turn in the road. I turned around and headed back. The Durango passed me, heading the way I had been going originally. I got to where it had been parked and the woman was lying there in the snow. I thought she might be dead, But as I pulled up, she sat up, then shakily got to her feet. She was probably in her 40s, very thin and in a skirt and an inadequate jacket. I asked if she was okay and she just said, "I'm cold." I had to get her into the passenger seat of my truck and cranked up the heat. She sat there shivering, her body hunched forward. She had blood on her face and her fingers were red. She didn't say anything about what had happened. I pulled out my phone and surprisingly had enough signal to call 911. I explained what I'd seen and they dispatched a state trooper. It took 15 minutes for him to get there. The only thing the woman said was, "They're gonna arrest me." I offered her some napkins and water, and she wiped her face off. I didn't want to bother her, since she seemed to be in shock, so we just sat there in silence for a while. The trooper arrived, and she let out a designated sigh, opened the door and said, "Thank you for helping me," and walked over to the trooper. He spoke to her for a few seconds, then had her sit in his car. He came over and I explained what I had seen, and described the Durango. He thanked me and said I could go. A few days later, my phone rang while I was away from it. It was a restricted number, and the voicemail was from the trooper, thanking me again, saying that he may need me to offer some more testimony if I was willing. I never heard back from the police. I never found out what had happened. I think it was either a sex worker or a drug deal that went bad, but I never saw anything about it. When I was around 11, we went camping. It was the first time I did it. According to the schedule, we were supposed to listen to a person tell scary stories, but for whatever reason they never showed. So, as our final evening activity, we went on a night hike instead. The walk was pretty normal and actually quite fun, until we stumbled upon these cute little fairy homes built into a tree. We all looked at the tiny houses and noticed you could open one of the doors, so we looked inside and found what was rather spooky. It was a note saying back in 5. Now this may not seem that scary, but just you wait. We carried on and kept walking. Later on we stumbled upon a lake, and we looked across it, shining our light so that we could see, and saw something rather strange. Parked on the opposite side were a few vans and cars facing us. We were instantly spooked, and to make things worse, we started to see people walk around. You could tell something wasn't right, because even the teachers seemed to be scared and nervous. The doors of the van were open, and I believe something was inside, but I can't remember. Nevertheless, it scared us more and more, and soon after we left and headed back to the fairy/gnome houses. On our way back, curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to check if the note was still there. It was not, and that sent shivers down our spine. We left straight away, and for the rest of the night we wondered who took the note. I doubt it was one of my fellow classmates because we were all looking at it, and I doubt anyone would have taken it. Many years ago, my now ex-husband and I purchased what used to be an old farmhouse. It was a unique old house that had been added onto many times over the years. We started updating it room by room and had been living there about a year before we began to work on the finished basement. I had 3 boys from my previous marriage who were 9, 11 and 14 that lived with us but visited their dad every weekend who lived about a mile away. The first project in the basement we planned on doing was to convert one of the good-sized storage rooms into a walk-in closet for seasonal clothing, sports equipment, etc. The previous owner had left several cheap metal shelving units behind in this room that we'd never moved but weren't part of the new design. The night before I was set to start on the project, the boys and I had rented videos and watched Stir of the Echoes with Kevin Bacon. From what I remember, the movie was about a dad character, Kevin Bacon, having dreams or visions about a young girl who had died and was trying to get him to find her and solve her murder. It wasn't too intense, but had a few suspenseful parts with jump scares and special effects. I recall the end being something about him digging in the basement and trying to find the dead girl, breaking through a blocked wall and discovering her behind some thick plastic sheeting or something like that. Predictable, but we all enjoyed it. especially my 11-year-old who loved scary movies. The next morning, the boys all went to their dad's. The new husband goes to work and I start on the storage room project. The walls in this room are covered in thin paneling, so I start moving the metal shelving out so that I can begin work, and I see that the paneling on one side of the walls behind the shelving isn't snug against the wall like the rest. It's kind of gaping a bit at the bottom. I take a closer look and see a very small slide lock, like a miniature deadbolt, cut into the paneling and a distinct cutout like door. What the hell? We have a secret room, how cool! I can't keep this discovery all to myself, so I run upstairs and call the boys at their dad's. Eric, the 11-year-old, answers his phone and I tell him what I found in the basement. Both of his brothers are at their friends' houses, but he's super excited to check it out, and jumps on his bike and zooms home all sweaty from pedaling so fast. This is exactly the kind of thing Eric loves. We go back into the basement. I slide the lock and pry the door open with a screwdriver. The first thing we see is a thick plastic sheeting, just like the one we'd seen in the movie the night before. Holy hell. We slam it shut and start laughing. He says we've got to be brave, Mum, so I go find a razor knife and slice through the plastic. Inside is a small room with a sandy dirt floor that has several old TV sets and buckets of old glass tubes and an old desk with newspapers in it. No dead body or Kevin Bacon to be found, but we sure had fun going through the desk and laughing about the secret room that we called the Stir of Echoes room from that point on. My father-in-law said that it was an old-fashioned root cellar that was used to store root vegetables like potatoes back in the day. What a strange coincidence that we had watched that movie just the night before. This happened to me in the summer of 2009. I was at a 6-week Air Cadet band camp, and basically, it was the most messed up 6 weeks of my life. Second night there, we're lying in our bed in the barracks. There's 8 of us to a room, and we're awake, and just about midnight talking about girls and texting. One guy called Alex is the only one sleeping and is lying on the bottom bunk next to the door. Suddenly he moans and's like, "Guys, why am I drinking?" We all burst out laughing, but then he flipped on the light, and he was covered in blood. So we call the sergeant to change his sheets and shirt, and they flip off the light while he's cleaning himself in the bathroom. We lay there, staring up, waiting for Alex's return. When he does, he flips on the lights, then he turns them off again once he's in bed. This time we notice there's a weird glow on the ceiling. The dude on Alex's top bunk, called Brad, starts freaking out and jumps off his bed. Naturally, we all jump off our beds too, to see what he's tripping about. On the ceiling in glow-in-the-dark letters are the words, "Die, Adam," and it looks like it has blood spattered around it. By the way, Adam was the name of a kid who supposedly committed suicide years ago in that very same barrack block. Bear in mind those letters were definitely not there before he returned from his nosebleed cleanup. We freaked out and yelled for the sergeants and basically didn't sleep that night. That's just the beginning. Fast forward a few weeks and a bunch of us, Alex and Brad included, are chilling in a room. Enter Sergeant Williams looking very pissed off. He mentions that a friend of his recently got shot in a gang-related something or other. His reaction is to sit down cross-legged and start chanting in some language. One kid, called Simon, says, "You're gonna burn yourself out." Sergeant Williams says, "No, I have more than you think." Now the rest of us don't have any idea what the hell's going on, so we start laughing, while he does this weird snapping then patting the ground thing. Angry, he tells us he's chanting in Gaelic, and that he can manipulate energy with his mind. We're all like 17, 14-year-olds, so we burst out laughing. He beckons me over and tells me to put out my hand, and I oblige, and he hovers his hand over mine, and I'm like, what the hell is this? And then my hand turns really hot, and I retract it quickly. I'm scared, so I just leave the room. A few minutes later, Sergeant Williams tracks each of us down and tells us that if we tell anyone, he will, no joke, end us. I nod and keep silent. I'm easily bullied. But Alex and one of his friends go straight to the sergeants. I wasn't there, but from what Alex told me, I gathered that Alex and his friend were put into lockdown while the police came and took a struggling Sergeant Williams away. We heard rumors that he was temporarily moved to an asylum. One more weird thing happened. We were about 4 weeks into the camp. It was Saturday and it was windy as hell. They wouldn't let us out of our barracks because apparently there was a tornado warning and they had put us on standby and that we may be moving to the basement. So we all sat in the halls polishing our boots and singing Amazing Grace while the power went out. It was like a movie because there was lightning and stuff and people were hysterical. Suddenly, some idiot at the window starts freaking out and a bunch of us run over to see what's outside. Now, I didn't get to see it, but people say they saw a very Sergeant Williams-looking like figure standing in the middle of the field behind our barracks staring at us. Some serious horror movie kind of stuff. It was awesome and horrifying at the same time. Craziest 6 weeks ever. I've had a painting follow me for the past 13 years. I and my first boyfriend found it in an old house that we were helping my sister tear down for a friend. I'm pretty sure it's actually a print or copy. It's not all that interesting, honestly. It's just kind of pale-coloured print of a little girl seen from behind standing in a field. The only thing about it is that I and a few other people have said that if you stare at it for more than a few seconds, it makes you feel uncomfortable. It doesn't happen to everyone, just some people. For me specifically, there's kind of a blank space in the center that seems like there's something there that you simply aren't seeing. I don't know why. It's just a basic background, but that's how it's always made me feel. So it started with this simple fact that I don't remember bringing the painting home with us, and yet, when we went to pack up and move a few months later, it was in our stuff. Not just lying out somewhere, but actually behind other things. I'm kind of forgetful, so I figured I just grabbed it and forgot. I do remember setting it aside, because my boyfriend didn't want it, and I didn't care, so I left it behind. Well, a month after we move into our new home, I find it tucked behind some random things. Again, I kinda thought maybe someone helping us pack grabbed it or something, so it's not a big deal. At this point, we kind of have a joke about it following us, but didn't think anything of it. We just left it lying around. That relationship ended very badly, and I was left homeless, sleeping on friends' couches. My ex gave me my stuff that equaled out about 3 boxes, and that was it. They were not large boxes. I went through them several times, and I knew the print wasn't in any of them. I was couch hopping for about a year and never saw the print. I met my now husband and we moved in together. Several months after we had unpacked everything, I'm digging through a closet, and guess what I find tucked behind some random junk? The print. I told my husband this story and we again joked about it, but this time we put it on a shelf. We've moved twice more since then, and each time it's come with us. I don't remember ever specifically packing it, but it's always been somewhere in our things. I always put it somewhere out the way, because like I said, it makes me feel a bit strange looking at it for too long. I have been thinking about getting it framed, as I've never done anything with it. I've just accepted that it's apparently going to be with me until it decides not to be anymore. It's never been good or bad as far as I can tell. Just following. Once my husband and I went into a restaurant that was laid out in an L shape. The order counter was in the front, short part of the L, and the seating in the back, the longer part of the L. This happened in Visalia, California. We were far away from home with our 3 small kids visiting my mom in the hospital when we stopped for lunch. We chose to sit all the way in the back of the L shape. There was a large mirror on the back wall, so I sat facing it. There were big glass windows near us facing the parking lot. We were almost finished with our meal when I noticed an extremely intense, angry-looking man coming directly towards us from the parking lot. It was weird because there was no entrance close to our table. Right away I got a very nervous, sinking feeling, which I tried to hide from the kids. It was almost as if the creep knew we were there before he saw us. He stared right at us with an angry face and furrowed brows from the outside as he stalked towards the bend of the L shape where the entrance was. I elbowed my husband and quietly told him to be on alert. The man took a seat at the table behind us without ordering food. He sat there scowling directly at us. We could see him in the mirror. I got the feeling we were in his seat. Nervous fright waves refracted from my body as I tried to keep my cool. Hubby and I gathered the kids and herded them outside. They were all under ages 5 and below. The man stood up and followed us to the exit, then halfway through the parking lot. My husband whispered to me our only plan. If the man accosted us from behind, we would turn on our heels and ram him physically to knock him to the ground. I'd call 911 while my husband would sit on top of him, this nutcase. Thank heavens the angry man stopped and returned to his seat at the restaurant. Perhaps he feared someone else may take his seat. We set a new world record that day for strapping 3 kids in car seats and screeching away down the street. When I was 20, I used to go driving around a lot at night. One time I was doing my usual drive around to no particular destination when I decided to go down this dirt road in the middle of nowhere in South Georgia. There was a cotton field on the right side and woods along the left side. It was like this for miles. Shortly after driving along the road for about a mile or two, I noticed something hanging from a branch along the wood line. This branch stretched all the way across the road, nearly reaching the cotton field. What was hanging from this branch is stuck in my mind, even years later. It was a deer, but not just any deer. This deer had been mutilated. It was hanging from its antlers by what looked like towing straps. It also looked as though it had been beaten with blunt objects. Its body was filled with deep lacerations, and it was also nearly split in half horizontally. Its lower half was barely hanging by a thread. Still to this day, I have no idea what it was doing there like that. I used to work at a summer camp. The scariest thing that's ever happened was during one of my stories with 15 campers around the fire. The other staff members working with me interrupted me mid-story, which I thought was for dramatic effect, to tell me to be quiet and listen. We heard some howls far away from coyotes, but we didn't worry about coyotes since they're usually so small and timid. As I began to tell the story again, no more than 15 seconds later, another 3 howls came from the state woods around us, just closer this time. This continued until it felt like the howls were only 100 yards away, when they abruptly stopped. At this point, the kids had kind of panicked, and I was getting a little uneasy due to the proximity of them. But once again, I don't usually worry about coyotes since they're so timid. As we sit in silence, we waited to see what would happen. Not 2 minutes later, the calls started again, louder and closer. The first call came from around 100 feet into the woods in front of us. The second call came to our left, same distance, and the last 2 came from right behind us, around 50 feet or so from the fire, to the point that we could see the coyotes at the tree line. At this point, the kids are crying, and myself and a coworker stand up to try and scare them away. The coyotes at the back entrance of the woods actually stand their ground and growl at us. So we grab the nearest logs we can find and howl back, chasing them away, and ended up chasing them through the woods and found their den the next day about 3 miles up a hill, filled with bird feathers and bones. Cool stuff happened working at that camp. I miss it. Nothing really creepy happened except for maybe a mountain lion call here and there, and some faint rhythmic drums in the woods that we heard, but we guessed it could have just been some kids, right? I went to a high school that was built years ago, maybe 200 to 300 years ago to be exact. Me and my friend noticed these hatches were about 6 feet off the floor next to all these toilets. For context, the school was based around a quad, so there was a toilet down some stairs at each corner of the quad. Obviously we had to check these hatches out, so we did during a drama lesson that we snuck out of. We got in there, and there was a corridor under the actual corridor, which was only about 4 to 5 feet tall, so we had to crawl through it. The corridor connected all the toilets and the vents atop of the walls that were at skirting board level in the classrooms, so we could watch lessons go on, which was cool. There were tons of pipes and electrical wires and other non-interesting stuff that you would expect, apart from in one corner of the quad. The hatch for this one was locked from the inside, and all the pipes had gone back into the wall or stopped, so the wall was bare. Just concrete slabs rather than bricks, which was odd. There was a small gap at the bottom of the wall that I could only just fit through. It was a struggle crawling under as we had our mobiles for torches, and I'm not the smallest of people. When we got through, it felt so much colder in this opening than it did in the corridor. The space was also much more spacious as we could stand up, and the lights from our torches didn't light up the opposite side of the room when we shone them through, which made it seem like our torches weren't even on. The room smelt really bad, and we saw what looked like a decomposing cat, which was now just mostly bone and some fur at the next side of the wall closest to us. More freakily, there was this weird stone arch above the cat, and some red writing that wasn't blood but was pretty creepy. It was a few years ago, but I vaguely remember it saying something along the lines of, "If you are found here, the school will expel you, but Lucifer will do far worse." There were a few scratches on the wall and some symbols that we thought were letters, but we couldn't make them out. We took some pictures and got the hell out of there really quickly because we were crapping ourselves at this point. It was a fairly prestigious school, so expulsion was probably the scariest thing that could happen at that point. This was about 5 years ago. The pics were on an old phone that I can't get anymore. I would love to see them myself just one last time. These extremely disturbing events happened at my high school in the 1980s, some 7 or 8 years prior to when I went. My brother's high school principal arranged for an English teacher to murder another English teacher and her kids. The teacher was murdered. The kids were never found. The principal went to prison. He's out now. And the murdering teacher died in prison. It's unclear why it really happened, but there are rumors of a love triangle and insurance payouts. Her children were never found, but there was a rumor of them being burnt in the school incinerators, which were quite large. Principal Smith was released because of misconduct by the prosecutor/police, but he died shortly after being released. And it goes to follow that the same school produced a murderer who raped and killed a mum and her infant daughter. I knew this kid really well, and was honestly not surprised when it happened. His name, Caleb Fairley. We got this old vintage clock a while ago. It's been in storage for over a year. We moved recently, and my dad bought the clock and decided to hang it on the wall about a month ago. No one in my family liked the clock but my dad, so we kept it. So 2 nights ago I was talking to my dog about going to the bathroom, around 11 to 12 at night. As I take him out, I sit down and chill on the sofa. All of a sudden I hear this ticking, and my first thought process is, what's making the noise? So I go and investigate. I walk up to the clock and it's moving. It's ticking and moving, and the glass pane that usually covers it is wide open. I know nothing about this clock, so I literally just look at it and go, that's weird. Go to sleep and don't dream of anything as normal. The next day comes, and later that night my mum announces that she's going to sage the house. She hasn't done it in a while, but with all the stress and stuff that our family's been going through, we needed it. Before she starts to sage, I suddenly remember about the clock. "Oh, Mum, by the way, I heard the old clock ticking yesterday. She tells me that it's not possible, that it's a wind-up clock. So I was confused. My little sister, who's 10, then hears what I say and comes up to me like, "Oh, I heard it ticking too." We heard the ticking at different times in the night. So immediately my mum is just, "Get the clock out of my house," and leaves the clock outside and sages. That night, both my parents have nightmares about my younger sister. My mum describes how she's in my little sister's room and there's a round table in it. It has letters as if it's a Ouija board, and there's a voice that starts to speak to my mum, telling her, "I like it here. Please let me stay. I like your house." Now my mum is very sensitive to presences and stuff. There are times where she grabs things at Goodwill and flinches and tells me that whoever had it was bad. She's been in a car my dad bought to resell and literally started to cry and told him she'd never go in it again. When he got the papers for the car, it came with a title and the owner's death certificate. He died in that car. Anyway, my mum has experienced stuff getting out of her house due to the dumbass things my dad buys and brings to them. She begins to pray very strongly and tries to get him out. The thing comes back, and once again my mum gets him out, imagining as if she were burning him. The thing returns again, and my mum starts praying so hard that she starts to wake up from her dream. It started to try and negotiate with my mum, trying to let itself stay, but my mum said no. My mum has this thing where she imagines a beam of light coming out of the heavens, and that's what happened when her dream ends. When she wakes up, her entire right arm is cold. My dad is now awake because he heard her screaming and chanting, and immediately my mum asks what time it is, and it's 3 a.m. The witching hour, you know. My mum starts to curse and say, "Damn it," and then tries to go back to sleep. And my dad had woken up and goes to sleep and proceeds to have a nightmare about my sister. So today comes and my dad is going to get rid of the clock. He goes to work, putting it in his van, and starts to work on his van, which he's going to sell in a few hours. The next 4 to 5 hours were the most difficult time that he's ever had with the van in a while. He cut his finger, burnt it, and nothing was going well. Eventually his deal happened and everything was alright on his end, but once he had finished with repairing it, he opens the slider door, and he forgot he left the clock in the van. That was what was causing so much trouble. So all of that happened today with that clock, and now, just an hour ago, I was telling them again how exactly I came up to the clock and everything, and it was just ticking. I saw it tick. The glass pane was wide open. My parents looked at me as if I'd grown 2 heads. You see, the glass pane was locked with a key that no one has. My dad had been looking for it earlier that week, but no one found it. All 3 of us go around in a circle asking if one or the other opened it, but none of us did. We never even found the key. So I don't even know what was up with that. There is also no way my little sister could have opened it, because she's too short. So in conclusion, we have no idea how this clock somehow opened on its own, not to mention all the weird stuff that happened to our family. As you can imagine, once it was gone and Mum saged the house, everything went back to normal. I got my first job when I was 16 at a Taco Bell, about a 7-minute drive from my house. It was a step up from a McDonald's, and close enough that if I didn't have a ride, I could tough it out and walk or get an Uber, because it would be cheap. I made all my friends working there. I was really shy in high school, and didn't talk to anyone, but work was a second home. I felt more comfortable, less judged, and opened up into a new person after working there for a short time. After a few months, our general manager leaves after being hired elsewhere, and we get a new one, Dan, who had been working at another store. He was arrested and had been in prison for a while, and got out and still had his manager's keys and just came back to work. They needed a new general manager at my store, so they switched him over and promoted him. He was kind of weird, but I tried to be nice. I really liked all my co-workers, location, and loved the last GM, so I was trying to make it work with this one too. That's when I realized he was a massive weirdo. He started sleeping in his car in the parking lot overnight. He had a wife and house, was twitchy and jumpy, and had a bad leg he would constantly be limping from, and started stealing bags of tortillas and messing up the inventory. He was just obviously a tweaker. They literally hired out of prison to come run a store. Great fit. I was over it now. I missed the old general manager, and the other managers were between 18 to 21 and a bit hard to get along with. I was thinking of leaving, but was just sort of riding it out, hoping all these people would eventually be let go. Then I'm standing up front counter during a shift. I was assigned to lobby, i.e. taking people's orders, cleaning the front of the restaurant and the bathrooms, and restocking straws and stuff. I'm wiping down a fat stack of trays and just zoned out, when Dan comes up behind me. "So you're thinking of leaving?" We're all pretty much in each other's business, and everyone told each other everything they heard, so I didn't care that he knew and wasn't remotely surprised. I just said, "Yeah," and probably came up with some excuse about school. "Well, if you do that, I'm gonna have to give you a few drinks and put you in my car." "What?" I side-eyed him. "What does that mean?" I got an uncomfortable laugh and just kept on wiping. I quit that very next day. This happened about a year or two ago. I'm in the Alabama Air Force National Guard, but I work in a city in Florida. I'm traveling home for the weekend late on Friday night, since I had to be at my unit the next morning. I have drill once a month. I have been traveling for a while, and I am on a highway in Alabama near my parents' house. It's about 9 p.m. and there are no lights to light up the street. It's pitch dark when I see a car stop at a stop sign about 60 to 70 yards in front of me, and he goes across the street I'm driving on. Mind you, it's dark and the car had his headlights on. When I go to the street he crosses, and I look down the street he went down, and there was no street, no cars, no lights, nothing. There was only grass and a telephone pole. I would have seen the red backlights at least, as I was going too fast for him to disappear before I got to him. I got out of there as fast as I could, and to this day I still cannot explain exactly what happened. I used to teach outdoor education, which was essentially just summer camp during the school year, and school groups would come up and spend a few days at the camp. On their last night, we would always tell them scary stories around the campfire. It was the same scary story every time. We worked in partners, so there would always be 2 staff members for every school group and make scary noises. So I'm telling the story and every few minutes there's a snap of a twig or a rustle in the bushes. And of course, as always, the kids get all freaked out and they start getting scared. It's very fun. Well, as I'm telling a story, I'm walking around the campfire, looking at all the kids' faces, and I notice a familiar one, my partner Eric, sitting there smiling at me, wondering why I'm staring at him. My heart has never beat so fast in my life. Eventually, I sped through the story and all the kids left, and I explained to Eric that I thought it was him in the woods, and his eyes got very wide and he said, "Are you telling me that it wasn't one of the staff members?" So we both ran back to the main road. A while back, a friend of mine moved into a new house by the docks. The first time I was walking up to the side door, I noticed a small, old-looking door on the side wall of the raised porch. I inquired and all they could tell me was that they called it the rape dungeon, and that they had never been in there. I think there was some creepy story to go with it involving a small child. I told the guys we needed to find out what was inside there, but soon forgot after looking around the house. The next time I went over, I again insisted that we needed to make our way into that room and find whatever goodies it had in store for us. An hour or two later, we ended up in front of the house having a smoke, and it seemed like the perfect time to bust in. We found some tools to break the old rusted lock and got to it. 10 or so minutes later, the lock was off, and we were peering into a dark, low-roofed room, not being able to see more than 2 feet in front of us. Someone saw a light switch and flicked it, revealing a small room that looked like it hadn't been touched in many years. A big wooden barrel/vat lay to the left, the kind they make whiskey and such in. On the right was a small metal can with coiled copper tubing through it, a huge mixing rod of some sort and some weird-looking pillboxes. As soon as I saw the coiled copper pipe, I realized what we had stumbled on. A moonshine dungeon. The whole room looked as though it had been dug out by hand, with concrete pavers laid dodgily on the floor, and in front of us another opening in the brick wall that led to a room with a wire bed frame on one side, and stacked the roof with large old bottles on the other. We were pretty excited at this point, to say the least. We started poking around as you do, find some old Playboy mags and other weird bits and bobs. I was expecting the barrel that was on its side, when I knocked out one of the chonks that kept it from rolling around. I went to pick it up from behind where the tile was, and I saw a plastic bag or something of the sort poking out from under the sand. So as you do when on a treasure mission, I started to pull. And this is where things get really interesting. I get the bag up and find that there's another bag inside and another, and this goes on for 40 to 50 bags before we reach a completely see-through bag that has some weird black-looking thing inside. At first we thought it might be heroin or something, but after peeling the plastic back, a wallet was revealed. So now we're getting really excited. We walk outside into the light and see a wad of $100 notes, thicker than I'd seen in a while, and they add up to around 17,000. That was a day I'll never forget. We ended up splitting the money. The serial number showed the earliest notes were only from around 15 years ago. In any case, free money. A guy killed himself in one of the girls' bathrooms about 9 years ago. A friend and I were the first to realize that the guy was dead and not just sleeping on the job or something. He apparently committed suicide by overdosing on heroin and was found with several syringes and empty tubes when they went to inspect everything. We, being the 15-year-old girls that we were, freaked out about seeing a dead body propped up against a toilet. It was all really surreal that a man would choose to do it on school grounds inside the girls' room. I think he was identified as one of the security guards who patrolled the freshman area. My friend and I passed by the man several times before we suspected anything was up. The moment I got a closer look and noticed his hands and face were really pale and almost blue. I then let out a small scream because holy hell, a dead person in a high school girl's bathroom. I think he sat there dead for maybe an hour, maybe more, before anyone, myself included, decided to do something. I didn't want to try and wake him up just in case he was in a bad mood, or he didn't want anyone to know he was in there. The 5 minutes we get as a break between classes was when my friend and I decided to let our teachers and other security guards know what was happening. And the way our school bathrooms are set up, the store's located in a separate station away from where the sinks are, so nobody worries about anyone being able to see them do their business. In the whole area where the sinks are, there's a bench along the back wall facing the mirrors. Occasionally we see one of the security guards, male or female, just sitting at the bench and get some rest during breaks, which is understandable because the bathroom my friend and I often use, and the one where we found the dead guy, is almost always empty and quiet. Everyone's pretty cool with the security guards and no one really cares. The day my friend and I walked in and noticed someone quiet in one of the stalls, we just thought it was one of our regular security guards who decided to sit in the dark for a change. Guess we were wrong. For my 5th birthday, my uncle got me. I was only about 4 years old at the time. I was playing hide and seek with my big sisters. I had thought about hiding in my parents' closet, but decided to hide under their bed instead. I was facing into the room so that I could see when the seeker came in. That's when I saw my middle sister Betty come in and hide in the closet. For some reason, the door was already open, so she left it that way and hid in the back corner. I was small enough, and the bed was high enough off the ground that I could put my chin on my hands and have my head straight, rather than having to press an ear to the ground. The counting finished, and my eldest sister Nora began her mission seeking. Not even a minute into the search, I'm looking at the closet and my mum still had her wedding dress hanging. I watched as the arms of the dress lifted at the same time, and the dress jerked on its hanger towards Betty. She screamed and went running for our mum, and I wiggled my way out of my hiding place. I found everyone in the kitchen, Mum trying to placate my terrified sister, and the other sister with a look of bemused confusion on her face. Betty is trying to tell Mum what happened, but can't seem to get the words out. All I can remember her saying was dress, arms. I went over and tugged my mum's shirt to get her attention. Not now, she said, but I saw it. That got her attention. Saw what? Your dress. Its arms lifted up by themselves and it moved on the rail. That's why Betty's crying. Mum ushered us all down the room with her, and the dress was in the same place she'd seen it last, hanging limply and forlorn. You must have imagined it, Mum told me. But then why is Betty crying? I asked. Betty was standing in the doorway of the room, refusing to get any closer to the closet. How did you see if you were hiding? Mum inquired. So I wriggled my way back under the bed to show them, and had a very clear view up on the shelf into the closet. What I didn't know was that Betty had also seen a face, as if someone were wearing the dress and trying to reach out to her. There was a psychic living at the top of our street at the same time, so the next day we all trooped off to see her. She told Mum that it was our Nana, her mother who had died the previous year. We didn't believe her though, because we'd seen Nan before and she'd never done anything to scare us. We never did find out who or what it really was. Betty still won't talk about it and refuses to acknowledge any paranormal happenings in that house. There are a lot of stories from that house, but nearly 30 years later, Nan still comes to visit. In fact, all my grandparents still visit. I know who it is by the scent. Potpourri for my mother's mum, burnt toast for her dad, tobacco for her dad's dad, and for his mum, her favourite perfume. I went on a cross-country RV trip this past spring with my friend Melissa and her 7 kids and 2 young German shepherds starting in West Virginia, in a 20-year-old RV christened Big Betsy, and almost everything that could go wrong did. Among other things, the water lines broke the night before we had to go, so we relied on jugs for the entirety of the trip. The gas tank cap was busted, so it was a hell of a job to get it off. Tires had good tread, but a couple were pretty old, so they worried me. We found out the auxiliary batteries sucked, so we needed to jump-start them with a power supply every time we stopped. The main battery cable had a bad connection, so every time we started the engine, I had to stand in front and jiggle the cables while she turned the key. The slide jammed, and we had to get a pry bar to get in and out of it. Driving through Colorado Springs, we blew a spark plug out and had to stop for repairs. Luckily, her brother, who used to be a diesel mechanic, was traveling with us, and only took a day to fix it. Regardless, we were still having a great time, seeing the scenery, stopping at landmarks and national parks like Garden of the Gods, Mesa Verde, and the Grand Canyon. The furnace went out the night before we got to the Grand Canyon, and it got down to 17 degrees. I got up every hour for 10 minutes to heat the RV a bit using the propane stove, turned it on and off to rest, then did it again every hour that night. We went to Roswell, Las Vegas, then on to Malibu to see the ocean and LA for a few days. Then we headed up to Yellowstone and were blown away not only by the park itself, but the drive there from California, through Utah and Idaho, just so breathtakingly beautiful. If you've listened this far, you've come to the point of the story. After Yellowstone, we had to leave from the west entrance, since the other roads east and south hadn't opened yet. We drove up into Montana, and for some reason her brother insisted on getting off at I-90 to a 2-lane highway through the Crow and Northern Cheyenne reservations. He was perpetually driving like an hour ahead of us because his RV was faster, and he's a bit of a reckless dude. But we didn't want to be far from him in case we ran into engine trouble, so we didn't really have a choice but to follow him. Even though I voiced much hesitation on taking a back road route in the dead of night through a reservation. So we find ourselves taking the ramp to Route 212, and had just gotten onto the Crow Reservation and stopped to gas up, and immediately things just feel odd. It's past 10 p.m, and as I'm pumping gas, I'm hearing children running around and playing off in the dark, and cars keep driving up to us slowly, checking us out. I get back in and Melissa is already saying, "Get us out of here, it's creepy as hell." So I do. We haul off down 212 in pursuit of her idiotic brother. Alright, he did save our bacon in Colorado Springs, so maybe idiotic is too strong. And there is nothing out there. Inky black skies, long, desolate roads, sporadic groups of 4 or 5 houses every few miles. I'm acutely aware that we lost self-service as soon as we got on that highway, so I'm just praying that nothing goes wrong. I try to ignore the acute feeling that something is watching us. Her dogs start to whine in their cages. The feeling of unease has continued and I really don't want to stop, but Melissa said we need to let them out to poop or we'd be cleaning up a mess. I pull over next to a big field and she gets her oldest daughter Ariana and Isabella to leash them, and I throw open the doors to let them out. As soon as they hit the grass, the 2 German shepherds sight something in the darkness and start going absolutely mental. They're barking and straining against the leash, and the girls are struggling to control them. My blood pressure spikes, and I look over at Melissa, and she looks completely bewildered. And I reach up to the overhead compartment and pocket my handgun, which I brought for protection. We get the girls and the dogs back in the RV, and peel off down the highway again, cognizant of the fact that we're probably going to have to clean up crap, since they couldn't go outside. They're back in their cages and continue to whine. I drive on for another half hour or so and they're still whining, and Melissa says we really need to let them go outside again. This is the last thing I want to do, because this whole time I've had this feeling that something is watching us, and I'm just running through my head all the scary stories I've read about evil spirits, wendigos, skinwalkers and all that stuff. And I reason with myself that I'm just scaring myself and they probably just smelled foxes or coyotes or something. And I really didn't want to have to clean up dog poo from the inside of the cages on some forgotten highway using jugs of water in the dark. We pull over again, and this time I take my gun with me, and I walk outside with the girls as they take the dogs out. I distinctly remember thinking, I don't know what good a gun will do against evil spirits, but I'm not going down without a fight. The moment their paws hit the ground, they immediately start to howl and bark into the darkness. The hair on the back of my neck stands up, and I'm looking at Ariana, and she has this look of terror on her face. I say to the girls, "Get the dogs back in the RV. We're getting the hell out of here." But her dog Hazel is straining so hard at the leash, and she can't get her inside. So I pick up this German Shepherd in both arms and have to heave her through the door and run inside. As I lean out to pull the door closed, I think to myself, this is the moment where something with sharp claws grabs my arm and pulls me into the dark. Thankfully, as I'm here writing this today from my bedroom and not the belly of a skinwalker, this did not happen. The dogs go back to their cages and continue whining, I jump back in the driver's seat and gun it down the road, and Melissa leans over and says in a panicked whisper, "What's going on out here? Don't you feel it? Am I crazy or does something feel really wrong?" I glance at her and remember one of the big no-nos of Skidmore law. You don't talk about them. You don't even think of them if you can help it, because it draws their attention to you. I say, "No, you're not crazy, but I can't talk about it right now. I feel it too, but just trust me, we cannot talk about it now." As I'm cresting a small hill on the highway, I look over at her and say, "Just trust me, we'll talk about it later, okay? But we can't now." I look back ahead, and that's when I see it. This enormous white rabbit standing on its back legs in the middle of the road. Looking back now, with the benefit of a cool head, I'm sure it was just a bit bigger than normal, but I'm telling you at that moment it looked huge. It looked like it was 3'5". I swerve this 37-foot long RV around this beast of a hare, but thankfully keep control. I pull the pedal to the metal and say, "I'm sorry," if I don't care if the dogs have poo in their cages. I'm not stopping again. And I didn't, thankfully. And they didn't either. We made it to the town of Spearfish safely and stopped for the night. And after visiting Mount Rushmore the next day, we recounted the fear we all felt that night. And I told Melissa specifically why I don't want to talk about it. And she said, "Yeah, I knew why. I've read all kind of stuff about the Native American legends." And I realized later with a chuckle that maybe those spirits were real. Maybe they weren't. But if they were, they probably didn't appreciate me wearing my Cleveland Indians cap throughout their reservation. Sophomore year of high school, a friend and I thought it would be fun to skip English class and go to the neighboring town's school. Very rebellious and dumb. When we got there, we were unaware that the school was in lockdown for a random drug test. We walked inside thinking, I bet we'll just blend in and nothing happens. Turns out the principal was standing in the middle of the hallway. When he goes, "Hey, what are you doing in the halls?" My partner in crime ran to a bathroom and I ran to the car. I was sitting there and suddenly I see my partner running to the car with the principal running after him. He jumped in the car and we sped off, and I noticed that a lot of students in the windows were staring at us like we were the reason for the lockdown, and maybe we brought weapons or drugs to the school or something. The principal was holding on to the back of the car. We got away. However, he caught the license plate from my friend's car, and a few days later we figured out that we got caught on the high school's security cameras. The principal wanted to sue us for trespassing on school property. However, he was too busy coaching the volleyball team to pay attention to the case. My parents were pissed, and I felt very bad about the whole thing, mostly because this was my first time skipping class, and it went absolutely terribly. I worked on a project in central London where there were many Victorian terrace buildings along one edge of the site and a heritage facade along the main road, a very well-known road. The project was to demolish the building behind while retaining the facade and build a new building behind to tie into the heritage component. During the demolition phase, we found lots of quirky elements, but the building needs a history context first. Parts of the building used to be the royal wine cellars until the end of King George VI's reign. After the 50s, the buildings were used for commercial retail and other uses, including a nightclub owned by some Emiratis. So, first thing we found on site was an opening in the wall that led to another basement cellar room. There were dozens of wine boxes in there. Unfortunately, none contained any wine or relics of value, but it was still cool to find. Had I then inclination at the time, I would have saved some of them and used them for something else. The second find, and more interesting, was that in some of the cellar rooms, which were used as VIP booths, there were wardrobes on the walls. The wardrobes were not fixed to the wall, but could easily be moved. Behind there were 2 beds and a basin in each subroom. These were very clearly used as a brothel or something similar, when it was being used as a nightclub. Nothing of value, but the wardrobes required moving to get into them, and it was a bit dodgy. My third find was by accident. My job required that I had to access to all rooms in the building, and there was a door I couldn't get into, but it was clearly a warehouse type setting behind it. On one of my visits, I saw a lady coming out and requested access. She very quickly shut the door and said I couldn't enter. I insisted I needed access as it was for the contract. She finally relented, but with a caveat, absolutely no photos whatsoever. When I entered this space, there were tens of vintage new Ferraris, some on stands, some covered and others ready to go. These were valued in the millions, some 2+, and her job was to relocate them whenever the owners wanted them, and to make sure they were clean and maintained. We also found World War II relics in the lead capping of the roof, heritage fountains, etc. A great building to explore, no dead bodies or anything, but I did get the creeps being in there. When I was in Boy Scouts, my troop would always go to a camp called Camp Taquitz for our yearly summer camp. That specific year they had an abnormal bear activity in and around the camp. It was a pretty sizable camp, but it was still way out in the boonies, so an encounter with a chipmunk was just as common as it would be with a California black bear. Wildlife management was done by some crazy old gunnery sergeant that we called Gunny, so you can see the situations you might find yourself in. I was tenting with a friend who had just joined the troop called James. He and I were sleeping in our tent in the middle of the night, must have been around 1 or 2 in the morning, when I was abruptly awoken by something. Everything is dead silent, aside from a plasticky creaking sound. Then I see it right above my head. Something was pushing the tent in so hard that it began to cave in right above, like something was leaning on it with all of their weight, except these tents were relatively strong. I mean, I could as a preteen jump on them and you'd just bounce right off. So being the scared little 13-year-old I was, I began to smack whatever it was with all my might, while simultaneously clubbing James with my fist to get him to wake up. Mind you, James is an incredibly deep sleeper, so this effect does nothing. Whoever or whatever it is was leaning so hard that it was almost touching my head. When James woke up from the nightmare he was having, he let out a blood-curdling, 10-year-old girl being murdered in the woods type scream. Whatever it was stopped leaning on the tent and vanished silently into the night. So for a few years, James, who had no recollection of the event whatsoever, and I always assumed it was a bear after the meds in my day pack. But after staffing at the camp and getting to know the law of the grounds a little better, I think something else may have been afoot. There have been many strange happenings around the camp, both paranormal and just normally unexplained. There's the usual Bigfoot and ghost stories, but older scouts and even administrative higher-ups claim to have seen things, claims of Wendigo, Skinwalker, hybrid things, some dead guy called Drag Thump, and a bunch of Native American myths. And the fact that there are no tears in the tent flap from the bear claws. We were the furthest away from the bear box. The fact that there was absolutely no sound from the supposed bear, as black bears make a hell of a lot of ruckus, and the fact that it was just persistently leaning on the tent instead of clawing at it like most bears tend to do, made me believe it was no Yogi or Smokey. It did not behave like bears do, and even if it was some older scout attempting to play a joke on us, they wouldn't have been heavy enough to lean that far into the tent, and probably would have erupted into laughter right after. Plus, my troop isn't like that. It's full of a bunch of mild-mannered city boys, perfect Eagle Scout material. Everything just seemed off. I've always been fascinated with haunted items, but never found the courage to buy one until recently. I purchased a haunted doll on eBay. The doll's name was Violet, and she didn't have a crazy backstory. She had long blonde hair and piercing blue eyes. She was the perfect choice, or so I thought. Violet arrived in my mailbox on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. She looked even more beautiful in person than in pictures. I was excited to have her in my possession and eager to see if I would experience anything paranormal. But I had no idea what I had gotten myself into. I sat Violet on my antique dresser in my bedroom and went about my day like normal. Nothing out of the ordinary happened. I went to bed and woke up the next morning. Still nothing. The next night, however, everything changed. I went to bed around my usual time. During the night, I heard a loud noise. I live in an apartment, so I figured it was the people above me causing a ruckus. I shut my eyes and drifted back off to sleep. The next morning, I woke up and looked directly at Violet. Her legs were crossed. I didn't cross her legs. No one else had been in my apartment to cross her legs. I freaked out and hurried off to work. When I arrived home that evening, I went back into my bedroom to relax. Violet's legs were uncrossed. I hadn't uncrossed them. I had left them crossed and didn't touch her. What was happening? How was a doll crossing and uncrossing their legs on its own? Was I losing my mind? I went to bed that night with worry. I was worried about what I would wake up to. Would Violet's legs be in a different position? I awoke that morning to the sound of my alarm buzzing. I immediately looked over to my dresser and Violet wasn't there. I live alone. No one had been in my apartment. Where was Violet? I jumped up out of bed and started looking all around my room. I glanced over to my bed and Violet was there. Violet was laying in my bed staring up at the ceiling. Had she been in my bed all night? How did she get there? I ran out of my bedroom, grabbed my keys and ran outside. I'm currently sitting in a McDonald's parking lot near my apartment complex, typing this. I didn't even want to be sitting in the driveway of my apartment because I'm so freaked out. How did Violet get into my bed? Is she playing games with me? Or am I losing my mind? I'm terrified to go back in there and find Violet, wherever she may be next. I contacted the lady that sold me the doll and she said absolutely no returns. A part of me wants to get rid of her, while another is scared to do so. I don't know what to do. I was a camp counselor in a remote area. Former campers and counselors had always told me that the camp was haunted, but I didn't really believe in that nonsense. Anyway, it was the last night of the session, and I had a cabin of 9 to 10-year-olds. I woke up in the middle of the night to one of the kids sitting in my bed. I was a little groggy, but I remember him getting up and walking outside, and I was like, crap, I've got to go after him and get him back in the cabin. I remember the door opened noiselessly, and that was the last I saw of him. As soon as this happened, I woke my co-counselor and told him that a kid left the cabin and that I was going to go after him. I opened the door and it squeaked like hell, and then I tripped over a bunch of suitcases that were at the stoop. It was the last day of the session, and we always put the kids' suitcases out there so they would get picked up early in the morning and loaded onto the bus home. I searched all around the cabin and in the surrounding area for about 5 minutes. I then heard my co-counselor calling me in a hoarse whisper, so I ran back to the cabin. I just counted all the kids. They're all here. I still don't know what I saw that night. Was it a ghost kid on my bed? I'm a motorcyclist and was driving my way down from my girlfriend's house. It's about a 20-minute ride, but it was 3 a.m. and the road goes through a forest without any streetlights. So I ride through the forest, already giving everything to my little 50cc dirt bike, when a naked mannequin is suddenly visible on the side of the road. I saw it appear in my headlights and drove by it doing 60 kilometers an hour. It was scary as hell. A mannequin standing there naked on the side of a dark road in a forest at 3 a.m. in the morning. Damn. I'm sure if any one of you would have passed it in the same situation, you'd have all got shivers too. I'm a 32-year-old male, and I was in first grade when this took place. It's a famous story in my family. Growing up, I hated school for many reasons. And one of those reasons was that I was always the target for bullying. Admittedly, I was a weird kid. I would talk to myself, blurt out random lines from movies completely out of context, and the slightest insult would send me into a rage. My bullies got a real kick out of this and would make fun of me every time to get a rise. The teasing would only end once I started pummeling them. And this story is about my very first bully called Ajax. It began one day on the bus heading home. I was talking to a girl I liked at the time called Diana, when suddenly the skinny blonde kid who was about half a head taller than me leans over his seat behind me and says, "Dylan's the Million's a baby." Now, any of you know what a Million's is? Yeah, me either, but the na-na tune was enough for me to turn my head and make it red. And being called a baby didn't help either. And before I knew it, I started fighting back against my bullies. So I just screamed at him over and over for him to shut up, which of course he didn't. Then Diana started yelling at him to shut up too, which only made him laugh. Now I should also note that Ajax lived just across the street from me. So this merciless taunting continued even after the bus pulled up at my stop. The memories of this part of my life are so vague. I'll jump to a few days later. I was playing outside when Ajax and his friends cornered me and took turns pushing me and calling me names. I yelled at them to stop, because it worked the first time, but they carried on harassing me. I lost it, grabbed an air pump and began swinging it at them. And I actually managed to chase them a few blocks before I turned around and went home. But now for the meat of the story. 2 days later I was playing outside again, when Ajax starts making fun of me from across the street. I don't remember what he said, but I walked over to give him a piece of my mind, and as soon as I got close to him, he grabbed the toy I had been playing without my hand, hard, which in hindsight wasn't a smart thing to bring, and threw it up onto the roof of his mum's garage. Furious, I went to grab him, but he turned and ran. I chased him around to the backyard, and when I turned the corner, I stopped in my tracks. I don't think I'll ever forget what I saw. There, tied to a tree and crying, was Diana. No joke. Ajax stood next to her laughing. To this day, I don't know what he did to her. My shock was swiftly replaced with the fury of a demon, and I grabbed the sharpest stick I could find and lunged at the laughing idiot. He caught my wrist, and we grappled for a while, me snarling, him laughing. As we fought, he knelt down and reached for a yellow water pistol lying on the ground. I stomped on his hand and somehow managed to drop the stick, and gave Ajax a shove. Turned and ran to the front porch, where I grabbed the closest thing to a weapon I could find, a metal canteen, and then hid myself and waited. After a long, silent minute, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. When I saw it was Ajax, I swung the canteen as hard as I could down on his head, and without waiting to see what would happen next, I ran back to the backyard, untied Diana, and walked her home. I won't lie, at the time I was feeling like a superhero. Until years later that I learned from Ajax's mum that I had actually knocked him out cold and completely ruined the canteen. We only fought one time after that. It was about a year or two later when he started giving me crap again. I grabbed a fake sword that I had made by removing the plastic blade and replacing it with strips of metal from my dad's shed, and went across the street to teach him a lesson. He grabbed a chain and we circled each other in his driveway, swinging at each other and exchanging insults. Thankfully, one of the adults, I forget who, saw the fight and broke it up before one of us got seriously injured. After that, we actually slowly became friends, though it was still a bit weird when we hung out. Once he tried unsuccessfully to get me to eat dog crap, and another time after that he moonied me when we went swimming in his pool. But aside from that, we got along okay. We played video games and even made a movie together in which I played a goblin, his sister a princess, and he the prince. Sadly though, the very last thing I heard from Ajax was that he threw a dart at his mum's head and ended up in a mental institution. His mum survived, but I have no idea where he is to this day. Not the scariest story. After all, I was only 6, and seeing my childhood crush bound and crying on my bully's property was an experience that will stay with me until my dying day. As a teenager, I lived in this old apartment building across the street from a bar. I was hanging out with friends in the basement. No one ever went down there, so we thought we would check it out. It was made up of 4 rooms, one of which was off the side in the front of the building and sort of small. Inside were old liquor bottles and jars of ravioli from the 30s. At the far end of the room were a bunch of boards stacked against the wall. For some reason, we moved them, and there was a hole big enough for a person to crawl into. Being curious, we got flashlights and crawled through this tunnel. It was dark and damp, and crawling with insects. We could hear cars overhead and realized we were under the damn road. It was maybe 150 feet long, and we came to the end where there was another board. But this time it seemed to be nailed on, and there's no way we could turn around, so we kicked and kicked until it was broken enough to go through. We crawled out. There were 3 of us, by the way, and we were in a dark room. We searched for a light switch, but there wasn't one, so we looked around with our flashlights and saw that we were in another basement. There wasn't a door, and we noticed a small wooden door on the ceiling. We got out, and seemed to what appeared to be in another basement. We went upstairs to find ourselves in the bar across the street from me. The bartender came around yelling at us, the owner as well, and questioned us, and we told her of our venture. We came to find out it was a secret tunnel used during Prohibition times. The bar was originally a speakeasy. My school was old. It was built at the time when the coup d'etat was very common in my country. For those of you who don't know, that is when the army overthrows a democratic government and seizes power, sometimes violently. So violent, in fact, that some coups had armed fighting in it, in the streets or air raids. This is why, when my school was built, they decided to add a bomb shelter in the basement for safety reasons. Time went by, and thankfully the shelter was never necessary for its original purpose, so the school started to store old furniture and various other things down there, and it was sort of used like a huge basement. Try to imagine a basement the size of a tennis court. But enough background. I started school in the mid-90s, and since the first time I saw the basement gate, it gave me the creeps. It was at the very end of a long hallway, and since it was only composed of iron bars, you could see half the stairs then the landing, and nothing more. Imagine a prison cell, but instead of a cell, there's a stairway. That's how it looked. It was creepy, but nobody thought much of it, since it was in a secluded part of the building, and it was always closed with a huge lock. One day when I was around 6 or 7, I was at recess when I heard a commotion coming from the basement hallway. When I got there was a big crowd of kids standing and pushing in front of the gate, trying to get in. The gate was open. From time to time, one of the kids would get out of the basement, make his way through the other kids, and run away in terror. Try to picture the scene. There was something down in the basement, and everyone was pushing their way inside because they wanted to see it. But when they finally did see it, they fled in horror. I stood there for a while watching the chaos until I spotted one of my classmates coming out the basement running. I chased after him and finally caught up to him and asked him what was going on. To this day, I don't truly believe him. He said inside the basement, moving around trying to hide behind the old furniture and boxes, was a dwarf. He said it was smaller than a kid, had a long, dark beard, and bark-like grey skin, long ears, thin, long hair, and ragged clothes. Of course, I had to see this myself, but by the time I came back to the basement gate, it was already closed, and the teachers were trying to calm the kids down. There was a lot of commotion in the school during the next few days about the whole issue. Many parents complained about it, and the school authorities tried to play it down, saying it was just another kid trying to play a prank, whereas others weren't so sure. They said that this thing walked, and the sound couldn't have been made by another kid. There was even a girl that said it tried to grab her by the ankle and take her deeper into the basement. After that, the gate was covered by a wooden board so you couldn't see the stairs anymore. Sometimes I think about the incident, because I would really like to know what actually happened that day. Was it really a kid in a costume trying to scare the school? Was it a homeless man that wandered into the basement and was using it as a shelter? Or was it just a case of mass hysteria? Or could it be possible that something far stranger happened that day and we don't have an explanation for it? This experience happened about a month or two ago. My family and I live in a one-bedroom apartment, and some of us sleep in the living room. I always work graveyard shift at a hotel from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. We had one of those cabinet mirrors that are not permanently attached, roughly 4 by 4, so it can easily be pulled up and moved elsewhere. Usually, it's best done with 2 people. Now for the experience. On a regular night, I was getting ready to head to work. I leave and everyone in the house is asleep. It's a school day, so most of them are asleep by 11. FYI, everyone in the house is female, and leaving me the only male. I head to work and come back in the morning. I go to my bedroom and notice the big mirror leaning against the wall. I found it a bit strange, but figured maybe my sisters wanted to move it so that they could use it to get ready, which would have been the first time them doing so if this were the case. So I asked one of my sisters, who was the only one getting ready, everyone else was still asleep, why she moved it, and she replied almost immediately saying, "I thought you moved it." I responded by saying, "Why would I move it? I just got here." She gave me a confused look. I then go to wake up my mum and other sister, and they both said that they had nothing to do with moving the mirror. So now I'm stuck. Who the hell moved the mirror? Factors to keep in mind. Everyone in the house was asleep, so no one is honestly capable of moving the mirror on their own but me. Everyone was in the living room at the time this happened, and the mirror was in the living room too. If someone physically moved it, how did they do it by not waking anyone up? There were all kinds of things in front of the mirror, makeup boxes, and not to mention a vase that was almost as large as the mirror itself. All of the stuff in front of it was still there, and they weren't even moved after finding the mirror in the room. So how did this person move it without moving the stuff that was in front of it? The walkway towards the bedroom is a bit crowded too, because we have this couch bed that pulls out, taking up most of the space, so you really have to squeeze through to get by. At this point, I really don't know who moved the mirror, because I truly believe that none of my family members moved it. There were only 3 people inside the house at the time, and I'm sure they had nothing to do with it. Possible scenarios? Someone came inside the house just to move the mirror? Obviously very unlikely, because 1, doors were locked and everyone in the house would have woken up to the sound of a door being opened. Plus, whoever this person was would have to have moved all the stuff in front of it too, which would have made a hell of a lot of noise. Or alternatively, something paranormal. And I honestly think that's what happened here. Like it literally moved or floated from the living room to my bedroom with no explanation at all. No one moved it. How did it happen? It really blows my mind. My sister has also seen a female in all white in the mirror while she was doing her makeup. This was on a day she was home alone. There are a handful of unexpected things that happen in our apartment, and sometimes it feels a bit uneasy, or the feeling that something is there. I don't know if it's just me being paranoid, but I do feel that way sometimes. Perhaps it's attached to the mirror. When I was 19, I was driving around town with a friend sometime after midnight, talking crap and listening to music. We drive past this road with a signpost to an area neither of us have heard of, despite both living in this town our whole lives. I asked if she wanted to go see where the road went, and she said yes. So I pull a U-turn and off we go. It's a paved road, with heavy trees on each side and a few houses. Nothing unusual for either of us. I was living on a street like this at the time anyway. Within about 5 minutes, the conversation just kind of dies off, and a few minutes after that I start to get this uneasy feeling. Then we passed a kangaroo on the side of a road. It remained perfectly still, just turning its head to watch us drive past, and I got this distinct impression it was standing guard. After that, I just got more and more anxious. I ended up turning to my friend and saying, "This is gonna sound stupid, but can you—" She was already taking her seatbelt off. "I'll lock the back doors." We kept following the road even after that because we were stubborn and didn't know when to admit defeat. It was at least half an hour. Besides, my 60-minute cassette tape had flipped twice over, 30 minutes of music on each side, between pulling on the paved roads and coming to a sign saying dirt road ahead. By this stage, I felt physically sick and my skin was crawling. Without a word, I did the quickest three-point turn I was able to and head back down the road. The closer we got to the turnoff, the better I felt, until we were back on the main road, where I felt like I could breathe easily again. We told a few people about it and got brushed off by most. We didn't even drive past that turnoff without flinching or shuddering for a few months. The feeling of dread had been that strong. Then about 6 months later, she turns to me out of nowhere and says, "Let's drive it during the day." So we went. My friend has both her phone and mine on her lap, with the emergency numbers punched in, and we're playing upbeat pop music trying to keep us calm. It took us less than 5 minutes to reach the dirt road, and on checking the odometer, the paved section was only 1 kilometer long. Once again, we got the hell out of there, and have never been back. No idea what the hell was going on that night, but I can say with certainty that we were not meant to be there. Even 20 years later, if someone mentions the area of the signpost, we shudder. And recently, I turned to her out of nowhere and said, "Hey, was that you with me on the road where—" "Yes, and I don't want to talk about it," she'll reply. I was a tutor for an elementary school, where I would pull out advanced reads and conduct a book club sort of thing to encourage kiddos that were ahead of their classmates to still find interests in reading. This was around the time when school shootings were getting really rampant in the US a couple of years back. So I'm there alone with 5 third graders joking around and having book club in the empty classroom I was allowed to use, when all of a sudden an alarm goes off and an announcement is made that there is an active shooter on campus and that we must lock our doors and conduct active shooter protocols. I lose my mind. I usher the students into a little coat closet out of the view of the door, lock the door and flick off the lights. To make it worse, me being a stupid college student at the time, I never had my phone charged. I send as many texts to loved ones as I can, trying to not alarm them, but letting them know I love them, and something is happening at work before my phone dies. The students are also afraid, and about 30 minutes pass, and I hear footsteps outside of the door, and quite literally stop breathing, but they go past. I don't hear any shot or anything. Another half hour passes, and I realize I should call the front office to see if they have any updates. My brain goes stupid during emergencies apparently, and I forgot that classrooms have built-in phones during my panic. They answer like nothing's wrong, and I say something like, "Hi, I'm a tutor here, and I have 5 students with me in room Y. Is it safe to come out? Are the police here?" The woman doesn't answer for a little, and as dead ass says, "Oh, we didn't make an all clear announcement? The drill is over." I was so close to tears I just hung up. Then an announcement was made that the drill is over. Nobody thought it would be important to let an outside school contractor know about a drill that very well could have been real. I swear I could have wet myself. We once found in one buddy's vacation home in Maine a secret passage. There were 10 of us, and the house was like 8,000 square feet. The secret passage started under a sink and a bathroom vanity and went all the way across the house into a closet-type deal that had a wooden seat/box thing where you'd push on a random knot in the wood grain and it would undo the latch. If you crawled into the vanity, you could sit up with some room to spare, enough room for 2 people to sit facing each other cross-legged. As you crawled closer to the other end, the wooden box end, you had to army crawl. It was very dark, and it got progressively narrower and was super weird. We jammed everyone in and hotboxed it until we literally couldn't breathe. It could have been a panic room, I suppose, but just connected the 2 wings of the house. His dad had actually built it and wanted to see how long it would take for his kids to find it. This story happened to me when I was 11, attending a Christian summer camp. It was night time, and one of the counselors decided it would be the perfect time to play capture the flag. I was set up as the goalie. I did manage to tag out some of the other teams as they were attempting to steal our flag. After a while though, no one was showing up to steal my team's flag, and I was starting to get bored. I started pacing around the goal, keeping a close eye on it, and that's when I saw something. It didn't move like an animal, and didn't seem to have a solid form. I can tell you that it was grey, and like smoke had come to life and formed eyes, arms and legs. The thing stood taller than my camp counselor, who was a dude standing at 6'1". Needless to say, my 11-year-old brain said this thing would eat me, and I ran to my counselor, actually bawling my eyes out. We lost the game because of this, and the counselor did report it to the site manager the next day. Now, some people have said that it was everything from an owl to a bear to a raccoon and even a bobcat. I've actually worked with owls since then, so I know it wasn't that. I grew up around raccoons, and bears don't move like this thing was moving. Bobcats, well, it was way too tall to be one. I have in fact educated myself on all sorts of animals since, just because of this experience, even debunked a whole load of paranormal activity just from doing this kind of research. And yet, I've never come across anything that would debunk what I saw that night. Quite a few years back, I had met one of my now really good friends on the internet. I'm in Alabama, and she is from Washington State. During some of the first few months of our friendship, we started discussing paranormal things and whether we believed in them or not. We were young teens around 15 or so. Being that age, we hardly took anything seriously, so we brought up the topic of Robert the Doll, discussed his origins, and then started poking fun at him. We'd made remarks about it being comical, seeing him run around through the windows if you were a neighbor, how scared we'd be, even if he were locked in the attic, as I believe that's where they said he was put at one time. It's been a really long time since I'd actually researched him, but he was a fresh study on my mind at the time, and how his footsteps would have thrown us into sheer panic. However, as teens do, we kept laughing about him and making comments about how we'd stop him if he haunted us and such. All of a sudden, my phone started messing up. We were texting all of this back and forth and my screen started blanking out her texts. Right as I'm typing my text, I tell her I wasn't able to see her messages. A message from her actually comes through saying that her phone was messing up. I can't remember what her phone did, but I do know that we were very frightened and immediately apologized to Robert. It honestly seems crazy, him being in Florida and us being in two completely different states. But to this day, and according to her, every 6 months when I bring it up again, I really feel like Robert didn't take too kindly to our teenage stupidity, and somehow interfered with our phones at the same time, as a warning to stop. And we did. This happened in Sydney, about 2013. I was driving through a factory area early in the morning to get to the airport. It was still dark, and there were no other cars on the road, when we see a huge, tall figure just start to casually walk across the 4 lanes. As we drove closer, our lights shined on him, and he slowed down even more and just glared at us, and kept walking forward. My boyfriend yelled out loud as he rolled to an almost complete stop, and as my eyes focused on the man crossing the road, I noticed the swastika tattoo on his shoulder, among others. The combat boots, the camo pants, and his hands were balled into fists. It was bloody terrifying, and the way he confidently slowed down and turned to stare at us as we drove towards him. I honestly felt like we could have hit him with our car and we would have bounced off him. It took a good 5 minutes before we spoke about it. It was just so unsettling, and the first time it ever dawned on me that people like that lived in my city. I still feel extreme shock about this whole thing when I realized he was for real, and his confidence was terrifying. I got the feeling he could be a person that would cause extreme violence with no cause and continue on as if it had never even happened. I didn't think those people really existed near where I lived, outside of documentaries. I was attending this boarding school that was over 175 years old. I was entering 6th grade and moving into the dormitories above the school infirmary. On the first night when settling in, I was by my desk and looked out the window to see this really young boy, pale and glowing. What was strange was that he had a cape tied to his neck, slick hair with a short-sleeved button-up shirt, shorts and bowling shoes. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me since he wasn't too far from the streetlight. As I'm looking at him, he looks up at me, waves and walks away while vanishing into the night. I told my roommates and they laugh at me. Fast forward in time, I'm now in the 9th grade and was going to this alumni event where we talk to alumni and look at memorabilia. I'm going through old Lettermans, baseball leagues and other things on display when I come across an old picture of the same young boy with a friend. I could recognize him immediately because he looked exactly like the same ghost that I saw a few years back. The picture was taken during Halloween, which explains the cape. I was so shaken up about it, I had to leave the event for a moment. According to one alumni, the little boy died in a flu outbreak in the infirmary that killed a lot of students in the early 1900s. His friend, also in the photo, survived, graduated, and donated the photo along with other tokens to the collection. I've heard many ghost stories about spirits who pass through and haunt the old dorms. Also, many of the buildings are basically relics, so I'm surprised that I didn't see more ghosts on campus. As a kid growing up, I lived in a small town in western New York about an hour south of Rochester. Town name Naples. A friend and I were exploring his basement and we found a boarded up tunnel. Looked like a boarded up window. There was a cord of wood stacked in front of it. We finally got the boards off and discovered a hole that went about 30 feet under the house towards the road's main street. We asked his parents what it was, and they told us it was a link to the Underground Railroad that slaves used to escape to the north. Actually to Buffalo and then across to the Canadian border. We did some research at the town library, and from everything we could find it appeared to be true. I guess there was once a network of tunnels under the town, and this house was on top of one of those pathways. I went to boarding school, so there are a number of creepy things I heard about at the school. Normally it's stuff like kids would play Ouija board at the school and would get a phone call from the leader of a local Wiccan community to stop, but sometimes it was a lot stranger. First off, the junior and senior boys' dorm is called the upper school, and in the early part of the 20th century, a student decided to take their own life in the room there. Since then, the dorm has definitely been haunted. There's actually a challenge to stay in the upper school alone for a whole night, in the room where he took his life. In any case, a number of strange things have happened. I know a number of people who've lived in that room who've said they've woken up in the middle of the night, usually at 3 a.m., completely conscious but unable to move. They've all described it as if someone were laying on top of you. Many of you might say sleep paralysis, and who knows, it might just be that. There's only one person I know of, though, who's attempted to stay in the upper school alone. She went to bed as normal until suddenly waking up at 3 a.m. to hear a door open and close, and the pitter-patter of footsteps down the hall. Thinking someone was playing a prank on her, she opened the door and looked out into the hall. Of course, no one was there, so she went back to sleep. Later, she again woke, with the distinct feeling that someone was watching her. She heard the door open and the footsteps in the hall. This time, she went out into the hall. When she got outside the room, the door slammed shut behind her, and absolutely terrified, she booked it out. When her and a faculty member went back the next day, they couldn't open the door because all the furniture had been pushed against the door. I'm a 17-year-old female, and usually don't experience more than seeing a few shadows. A few sounds in the house here and there, the basic stuff. But I do have one story that I have never been able to explain, and to this day still have no explanation for. Children are way more susceptible to the paranormal than adults are. As a lot of you may know, as a child, I never really had any experiences, nor do I really remember my childhood much in the first place. This one memory stands out the most, yet I don't even remember exactly when it occurred. I don't remember what age I was at the time, but it was during the time I was living with my mum at my Mima's old house, so I must have been about 5 or 6. I think my dad was at work. He worked late nights and usually wasn't home until dawn. I was fast asleep on the couch one night. The small 2000s TV was on and was staticky and bright. It was the only light in the room. It was bright enough to light up the rooms connected to the living room, as we lived in a small house. I was asleep on the couch, and I sensed something was in front of me, which caused me to wake up. When I woke up, I saw one of my toys standing in front of me on the coffee table, just staring at me. It was one of those old Teletubby toys that had buttons on its chest that you could push, and it would sing or dance. When I opened my eyes, it opened its eyes. As soon as it opened its eyes, I ran to my mum's room and jumped on the bed. These toys can't walk, but the thing was chasing me. When I got onto the bed, it tried to follow but couldn't. Instead, it crawled under my bed. I just went back to sleep. The next morning, I got up to see if the toy was still under the bed. I couldn't see it, but one of my cats and some wooden boards were stacked underneath. I reached in to pet my cat and he was stiff. I looked at his face and had no idea what happened. My cat had his mouth and eyes wide open in a natural, relaxed position, sitting his head up as if he had no time to scream, and then he was just frozen in place. The toy was nowhere to be seen. I haven't seen that toy in years. It's a bit ironic, considering all the theories about the Teletubbies. A few years after the incident, I told my mum quite a few times, but each time she seemed to not remember, until a few months ago. I mentioned it to her again, but this time got a completely different response. My mother has had the exact same thing happen to her as a child with a glowworm toy. She said that she had evidence, though. She wasn't the only one to see it. She had a sibling who was with her at the time that it happened to, and her brother had actually been bitten by the thing. It makes me wonder, what would have happened to me if I hadn't have had the instinct to run? I might have ended up like my cat. I still miss him. Last December, I went to a kayaking trip that was a 5-hour drive away from my place. I was invited by my friend to accompany his wife, so I left quite late, but I predicted I would get there around 8 p.m. The campsite itself wasn't that secluded. It was by the river, behind a little town, but to get there, I had to use a 2-lane expressway that goes through a forest reserve. It was around 7 p.m. when I reached the expressway, but what I did not expect was how winding and dark the road was. A few solar road lights and some signs of beware the animals passing here and there. I was driving alone and it was drizzling, but I wasn't too worried because the expressway was filled with cars going in the same direction as me. Because of that, the traffic was slower than the average speed. I have to admit I'm not a patient driver by any chances, so any chances I have to pass the cars in front of me until I get to this van at the end of the line. But I decide maybe I should just stay behind the van to be safe since the road was getting dark. Then we reached the passing line. The cars behind me started to pass us. The van maintained in slow speed. I counted and there were already 6 cars past us, so I ramped up and left the van. There was a right bend, and once I got through it, I was alone on the road. I waited for the cars behind me to come out from right behind the bend, but there was no one. I thought I was driving too fast, so I slowed down. Not even the van showed up. The passing lane ended, and now I was driving through a ravine. I saw a temporary signboard saying "Drive slow," and a few meters ahead another signboard saying "Landslide 100 meters ahead." What the hell? Is this road closed? But I didn't see any alternate route on the way, and there was no junction, so I drove as slow as it could be, and there was no landslide whatsoever, and still no sign of any vehicle on the road except mine. It was the most agonizing 10 minutes of my life, driving alone on a narrow, winding road in the middle of nowhere, just hills and trees all around me. No light, but my car lamp in front of me, and my phone screen. It was eerily silent. I put the volume of my car radio up, but I just didn't feel right. And it was so cold, with the air conditioning turned off too. I saw a welcome signboard at a left junction, turned left, and have never felt so relieved seeing random shop lots with people in them. To preface this, I'd like to say that my school is regularly featured on both national and local news and internet for the amount of ridiculous stuff that happens here. Riot, food fights, incidents where the girls' nude pictures get spread, Cypress Bay, anyone? And finally, a full-on bomb threat. My school has a fairly large campus, one large 2-story building comprising the entire arts, science and sports departments, the lunchroom and administration offices. Another 2 large-story buildings that house the media center and hundreds of classrooms, followed by a third 3-story building and 50 portables. This makes covering all school grounds time-consuming and very dangerous. So when there was a bomb threat in my freshman year, we were locked down for over 4 hours while the SWAT team scoured the building accompanied by police dogs and armed with M4s and 12-gauge shotguns. We were told to sit against the wall on which the door was because there was also a report of a possible gunman. I was honestly terrified. I saw the police and SWAT team run through the bathrooms in front of our class, and thoughts of running off campus into my house were inundating me. I lived in the neighborhood across the street, a 60-second dash that could get me to safety. In the end, they found out it was a fluke, and it was all staged by one kid that faked a bomb threat to avoid taking a test. Idiot didn't even get suspended. In my city, our big central library resides in a once huge mansion. When I was a kid, perhaps 9, I was there for a field trip when I noticed scratch marks on the wood floor swinging out of an arc from the wall. The wall itself was a bunch of built-in bookshelves, and deduced there may be a secret room there. I asked the librarian giving us the tour, and she revealed that there was a secret door there, which she opened for us by pulling a book out of one of the shelves. It was like something you see in a movie. It made me think of Clue, which was one of my favorite movies at the time. It led to a small display room where they put a bunch of random pieces of art and sculpture. Apparently there were a bunch of secret doors/rooms in the library too, but I never returned to have a look through them, though it would have been cool to do. I was a teenager and at a weekend camp. We were playing a flashlight tag game and I was running and hiding rather than seeking. I had been sneaking around a lot and bailing into the bush if younger kids came near. It made it more fun if the leaders moved, so the kids had more of a chance. This one time, I was just about caught by a group and jumped into an area of brush. As soon as I landed, I heard someone else shift and heard their breathing. I whispered, "Sorry, I didn't know you were here." They didn't answer. I waited for them for almost a minute in silence, aside from hearing the breathing, while the kids went a different way. I said to them, "We can probably head off now," and started to go. The other person also left rustling through the brush on the other way without saying a word. So while I don't know what I was hunkered down with, it was bigger than a raccoon and smaller than a fully grown bear. Maybe a baby bear or coyote. No idea, but it was definitely kind of freaky. My brother went fishing a while ago with some friends on some native land that they really shouldn't have been on. While fishing, my brother finds a funny-shaped rock, and he brings it home. Like most people, rocks are rocks, and that's just about it. He brings it home and for some reason is fascinated with this rock. I look at it and think it's just a regular rock, but he decides to shine it and leave it on his bathroom window. Nothing happens. But after a few weeks, odd things begin to occur. The soap in his bathroom is always moved. You know, most people leave the soap in the little soap dish, as does he. And then, at random hours, he starts yelling out who's moved his soap, and it would be found in the oddest of places. I think the funniest was once in a sock in his drawer. He assumed that one of us was trying to pull a prank on him, but after interrogating the family, I think it was pretty clear that no one could be bothered enough to be hiding his soap. Then it escalated to his keys, his wallet, even his passport went missing for about a month. All in all, he decided that it must have been the rock. I'm unsure. Nothing ever happened to me. But he took the rock back to exactly where he found it on his next fishing trip, left it there, and according to him, everything stopped after that. Make of it what you will, but my brother's a lot of things, but certainly not a liar. I'm a truck driver. I was crossing Texas in the middle of the night. After a while, I become white line mesmerized when I notice a few red lights slowly flashing ahead. Huh? Construction zone, I guess. Except, as I'm coming out of my self-imposed hypnosis, I slowly become aware that more and more red lights are there, on both sides of the highway, and they're all blinking at the same time. Fully awake now, I find myself trying to find the ends of the light, to the left or the right. I feel like Hammy in Over the Hedge. It never ends. It never ends that way too. I'm really beginning to freak out, but oh, wait. It was just a wind farm, and I'm an idiot. We went to a school located on a main street in Sydney. One day there was a bank robbery further down the street. Masked men, armed police, the whole 9 yards. During this time, a few students decided they were going to sneak off and have a quick ciggy down the back oval. This oval linked the main road to the back streets. Meanwhile, back in the main street, the police were chasing the robbers down it, who promptly ran through the school. By this time, we were already in lockdown. The smokers and robbers ran through the oval and into the back street. The police had lost them at the time and stood on the back over trying to work out where they could have gone. One of the officers heard sounds coming from the bushes, and all 20 armed police officers raised their guns and called for them to come out. 2 terrified 15-year-olds came out of the bushes to see 20 armed police officers aiming their guns at them. The robbers were eventually caught, I believe, and the 2 kids never smoked again. I managed a building in Portland, and in the basement there was a side hallway, and down this dark and old side hallway there were little rooms that had been a part of a flop house that was in there. In the back of one of these rooms, boarded up, we found an entire bathroom that was functional. It was old as hell, and we had to do a little work on it, but it ended up being really useful, and found another small room behind a wall near the coal chute that had a bunch of really old barrels and a pike. Pretty cruel stuff, but definitely creepy as hell when you're doing it. I sat next to a great guy in one of my classes in high school, Alexander, who was some kind of inter-district transfer after the year started. We had a ton in common and got on eerily well. Our last conversation was a debate on who or what Mr. Beam really is. I'm in the he's an alien camp, and Alexander was convinced he was an angel. We went back and forth on the pros and cons for both. What makes an alien, what makes an angel, and what would make them both behave like that? We couldn't really dissuade each other nor convince each other either way. It was one of the most intelligent debates about a frivolous topic I've ever had. It was fun. I was smitten, and looked forward to seeing him again the next day. He absolutely disappeared. He wasn't there the next day. His seat was empty for the next few days, and I asked my teacher if they knew anything or if he was okay. They didn't know who I was talking about. They had a look at their past roll sheets to find his name and noticed that he wasn't on for the last few days' sheets. They would not give me his last name because he was a recent transfer and he wasn't in the school directory. I went to the office out of concern, and all of this was far too weird. Again, they looked him up. Could barely find him. Would not give me his last name or any information. I asked them to pass on my number and name, and they had no address or phone number to be able to do that. It's like he never existed, except as a name on 1 or 2 pieces of paper. I'm sure there's a perfectly normal explanation, but it's so strange, and with the subject of our last debate in my mind, I always have this weird feeling that there was more to it. But that's impossible, right? Since he started walking, I've shared a room with my younger brother. For maybe 7 or 8 years, we've slept in a bunk bed, me on the top and him on the bottom. It's positioned so that one side is against the wall, which I've always slept against. It is extremely difficult to even touch me from there without climbing into the bed, which shakes a lot. Ever since I was young, I've had a fear of the dark, so to this day I sleep with a blanket over my head. A few years ago I was trying to get to sleep when I felt someone punch me in the throat, except there was no pain. It just felt like a powerful force hit me. The bed didn't shake, so no one had climbed the ladder. And I know that you can't punch with that force over the side of the bed. I lifted the sheet from over my head, and there was nothing there. I collect Lego sets, and one of my biggest is a large circular spacecraft that has a large ring on the outside connected to a cockpit in the middle. The cockpit has a handle attached to it that lets you spin it. Whenever it spins over a certain point, it makes a noise. The ship had fallen off the shelf, and the ring had broken apart. So I put all the pieces into a box to keep them together. One night, my brother was at a sleepover, so it was just me in the room, when all of a sudden the spaceship makes a noise. I assumed it was the handle falling over the point where it makes the noise, when the noise repeated, which would require the handle to rotate upwards from where I assume it was. This happened a total of 4 or 5 times before it stops. Needless to say, I rebuilt that ship the next day. This happened to a friend of mine and her brother, who I also know. The car had 2 other people in the back seat, so it wasn't some sort of illusion or mind trick. They were driving down to Tennessee from Kansas. It was a very dark and lonely road, as told by my friend called Kate. They were doing between 60 and 65. 2 hours pass and there are no signs of life. It was 2 a.m., and suddenly they see a black dog running towards them with blood eyes, and they slam on the gas and go faster as they near the dog, when it just vanishes. 5 miles down the road, they saw the dog again with red eyes, and they slam on the brakes and turn the other way. Till this day, they don't know what it was. The scary part was everyone saw it too. Kate, her brother, Jim, and the 2 friends in the back seat. They all saw the dog. They've speculated it could have been a bloodhound, but they don't know. In the summer of 2002, when I was 12, I went to the California School for the Blind for a tech training camp. There were 12 of us, 6 girls and 6 boys. The boys had started spreading scary ghost stories around school. What they didn't know was that some of the stories were actually true. On the first night, I was telling my roommate the story of the booms. Booms are toilet bowl-shaped bouncing creatures that bring knickknacks to children. The moment I described the sound they made, 3 loud booms came from the wall of the room beside ours, and I asked the girls in that room if they'd heard it, and they said no. The second night, I got up to go to the room attached to the shared bathroom. That's where I saw it. It was round like a ball, with a half horn on its head and glowing red eyes. I don't remember the next part, but I was filled in later. I apparently ran out the room screaming that there was something in our bathroom. Oddly, I remember leaving the room prior to seeing the thing to tell someone that there was peeling paint on a wall. My roommate told me she'd heard speaking in male voices, and also many rude words. She also said that she heard chains rattling outside and saw the glow of eyes. 4 years later, I started attending the school there. The staff members from that night still worked there, and her response when we met is that she remembered me that night. She then told me that she saw it, and she and other students and staff had heard similar stuff. Other friends told me that they had seen and heard things. Some of the events were freezing cups of water, glowing toys, drums, flutes, and orbs. I believe that in the children's dorm and health center are the 2 most haunted areas, and it's said that the school was built on an Indian burial ground. The following story takes place in Madison, Wisconsin. I met a college girl that was living in a defunct frat house. They had lost their charter for reasons I didn't know at first. We fell for each other and I moved in with her. It was a great apartment complex with pool tables and giant showers. One night when we were drunk, she took me to a room that was empty. It had 2 bunk beds, and above one bed was a secret door/hatch. It led to an upstairs room where most of the hazing took place. The story goes that one night during a party, in the dead of winter, a girl was gang raped by some of the frat boys, and they just left her up there in the cold, and she ended up dying from freezing to death. One of the frat boys was so distraught by the incident that he went up there one day and painted her picture on the wall, then hung himself. While we were up there, I could swear that the eyes on the picture would follow you around the room, and some people swore that they would hear crying coming from upstairs. As you can imagine, I never ventured up there again. My former comprehensive school has seen its fair share of paranormal activity. Caretakers, teachers, and students can tell you a ghost story about it, and you know for certain they're not lying. Enter my English teacher. He was my teacher for the first 3 months of Year 7, before he went to Romania. He had a really long name, we just called him Ryan. He was a funny guy, and before he left in December of 2015, he shared with us a really creepy story. Having been built on a graveyard, the school's caretakers have certainly seen some rather supernatural occurrences. Once the night has the area blanketed in darkness, and it definitely takes control here. On this occasion, the caretakers had to go into the basement, I can't remember exactly what for, when they came across a horrific sight. All that I do know is that there was a photo involving some mangled-like feet. My teacher was going to jump scare the class one day by doing a rah sound effect while showing the picture, and since it was only the good students in the class, I was the only person who got the jump scare warning. I'm not sure if he knew I was into Five Nights at Freddy's at the time, as well as creepypastas and stuff, but anyway. So chaos ensued after the jump scare, and to quote Cillian Murphy's Scarecrow, they scream and they cry. Now, I need to mention that my old school opened in 1966 during the Cold War era. The graveyard nearby dates back to the mid-19th century, around 1861, so there is an 105-year gap. According to my science teacher in Year 8, Given how poor the town where the comprehensive school was back then and now, the majority of the graves were made of sandstone, so you can imagine how many graves have been built over, and perhaps the restless souls those graves belong to. And then there's the story that Courtney shared with me. One of the school's bathrooms, the actual clean one near the assembly hall, is allegedly the place with the highest rates of paranormal activity in the school. I'd never had any issues in there. Perhaps if they were true, spirits took pity on me, as all the other toilets had been vandalized by the lowest of the low, thus leaving me alone to do the necessary business and wash my hands. But I was never in there for more than 5 minutes, so I guess that's another reason why perhaps I never experienced anything in there. But Courtney's story goes that she and a few other girls were getting changed in the bathroom for drama. I don't recall all the details, but what I do recall is that they were the only ones in the bathroom when something happened to make their costumes, or at least this girl's, called Karina, mysteriously go into the toilet bowl. Suffice to say, they were spooked upon seeing their costume in there. Courtney believes it was a ghost. I personally, as I wasn't there, don't know what to make of it. Perhaps someone managed to pull a prank for giggles. But this wasn't the only time that a ghost was allegedly spotted. She apparently saw one near the toilets that was once the maths block turned English writing block. Like I said earlier, this school has history, being old and with the graveyard beneath it. So who knows if there are spectres roaming around still. The paranormal has followed me for my entire life. These events I'm about to share span from when my mum was pregnant with me until I was about 8 years old. My parents built a house in Sashi, Texas, when they were first married and had an English bulldog called Muggins. 2 years after my parents were married, my mum became pregnant with me. The activity began with their dog, Muggins. Mum was about 7 months pregnant with me and wanted to sit in a chair in the living room to watch TV. Muggins was in the chair, and Mum told him to get down, and he would. So she went to push him off the chair, and he growled and snapped at her, and his eyes flashed green. Not wanting to get attacked by her dog while pregnant with me, she let him have the chair, and she sat on the couch. Fast forward another month, and my dad was trying to get Muggins to go outside. He refused, turned on my dad, eyes flashing green again, and attacked him, but luckily he wasn't hurt. Mum and Dad couldn't believe how Muggins had changed. He was such a sweet dog before moving into that house. Mum and Dad decided to give him away to an elderly man they knew. They asked the man months later, after I was born, how Muggins was acting. He informed them that he was doing great, an amazing companion, but the activity didn't stop there. My mum and dad were in bed, and my mum woke up my dad rocking back and forth in bed shouting, "No, stop, get off me." My mum, thinking he was having a nightmare, started shaking his shoulder. "Rick, wake up, you're having a nightmare." That didn't work, so she slapped him across the face, and before she knew it, something scratched her eye. It couldn't have been my dad. His arms were pinned to his chest, and he has very short fingernails. My mum's eye doctor confirmed she had a perfect cut right across her eyeball, and fortunately it didn't do any permanent damage. The next event happened one day when my mum was home with me. She went into the kitchen, pulled a glass from the dishwasher, filled it with ice, then some cola, and before she could lift the glass to take a sip from it, the entire rim of it broke off in a perfect circle. "Stupid me," she said to herself. The glass must have still been too warm when she lifted it, she thought, and then put ice in it. She threw the glass out for another, and did the same process, and the glass did the same thing. Mum at this point knew it wasn't a coincidence, and she yelled out for whatever it was doing that to stop it. And, as they say, third time's the charm, and she finally got to enjoy an ice-cold soda. This last experience was mine. I was about a year old, sitting in the living room floor, when one night, in front of the TV, with my mum sitting on the couch behind me, and my dad already being in bed, the living room was dark. The only light was coming from the TV. In the corner of the left of the TV, I saw a tall shadow figure of a man. I couldn't see any facial features, but I could tell he was wearing an old-fashioned suit from like the 50s. He must have noticed me when I saw him. He simply took his hat off, tipped it at me, and I saw he was bald. I pointed at him and said, "Mummy, man." When my mum and I talk about it to this day, she says that she never saw anything and that she is shocked I could remember, considering that I was barely 1. But she knows I'm not making it up, since she remembers that night very well. My parents sold that house not long after. My mum swears it was a demonic presence. Maybe. But who knows? I was going home from my girlfriend's apartment fairly late, between 12 and 1 a.m., when I noticed a man walking slowly on the driver's side. Given this is an old road with only 2 lanes, oncoming and going traffic, it freaked me out. I called my dad and he mentioned, usually when immigrants are tired and needing help, they show themselves and walk next to the highway. I called 911, and I hope they got the help they needed. I am a teacher and have been teaching English in Texas since 2012. This is my 7th year in the classroom, and I've recently moved up to a new high school in our district. I was and am very excited to begin my new year here, after being in the trenches of middle school classrooms for 6 years. My 2nd year in my first school, I was asked to move classrooms to a room at the end of the hall upstairs, which wasn't a problem per se, as many people moved due to attribution, and schools are always willing to help teachers move classrooms. The school at that time was roughly 20 years old. I took great pleasure in preparing a welcoming environment for students. The walls were covered, which I'm positive was a fire hazard, in amazing posters, engaging student art. I had several lamps as well as fluorescent lights. Every year for Halloween we'd begin to read and analyze Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, which was always a favorite. I took 2 days to read and analyze and read about the poems the students were really receptive to, and enjoyed the spooky atmosphere I created with decoration as we listened to Christopher Lee's and James Earl Jones' version on YouTube. It was a nice way to relax before the holiday. The first year in the new classroom right after Halloween and the Poe analysis, things began happening. The lamps would flicker. There wasn't any perceivable pattern, nothing flew around the room, exploded or fell over. The lamps would just flicker, whether I was in the room by myself or in a conference or anything. Once a week, the lights would flicker on and off. I attributed this to the old wiring, and honestly thought nothing of it, choosing to capitalize on the events and teach students about puns at the same time, commenting that we had a poltergeist among us who loved poetry and generally freaking us out. It wasn't disrespectful or ironic, it was more of a nod to whatever was happening and generally added to the climate of the room and the culture of the different classes. After winter break, something else happened. I was working with a small group in the back of the class during a test. I was playing music softly in the background. The music went all the way up, as in the volume was maxed, went back to medium level and then went back to max, then slowly went back down to the original volume. Again, I attributed this to our poltergeist. Students thought it was great, and logically, I thought this was due to some issue with a software bug, old wiring or something of that nature. Things like this, lights, volume modulating, happened once a week or so after the initial volume incident, and continued until my last year at the school, when I packed up my classroom and moved to a new school at the end of last year. I finally said goodbye to my little visitor part for nostalgia's sake, and nothing weird happened. I just took my last load of stuff down to my car, pretty anticlimactic. Nothing else happened until a few weeks ago at my new school. At this point it had been about 9 months since anything had happened, and one of my classes had earned a game for the day for an upcoming Friday. One of the students jokingly said that they were going to bring in a Ouija board, to which I said it was not a good idea, and I told him that I'm totally haunted. Of course they wanted to hear this story, and being that it was the end of the 6 weeks everyone was passing, and they liked stories, I told them the story and relayed the above. The only thing was this: I told them the story about the volume, and I was leaning over my chair, elbows to my knees, reminiscing as I mentioned the poltergeist. About 10 students were paying attention with eye contact at this point, and I was playing music on my computer when suddenly the volume spiked. It was completely maxed. It then moved to about medium level, maxed again, and went back to a quiet background ambience. And that's where the girls and a boy screamed. It freaked them out. They lost it. One Catholic student hung his crucifix on the volume knob and said he'd pray for me. One girl ran out the room and refused to come back inside for the rest of the class period. I was able to calm them down, and nothing else happened at school. I asked our tech guru on campus what might have caused the volume to modulate. Wires crossed, rats, hardware or software issues. I don't know this man well. We haven't had conversations, and he replies saying that it isn't possible. There's no logical reason, and then he said that you must be haunted. This was in front of a class where I have a few students from the original class that saw the volume thing happen earlier. It freaked them out, and I laughed it off, but it was the first time I really considered the words in relation to poltergeist. I looked around my classroom, and the one thing I bought decoration-wise from my middle school classroom was a painting/drawing of Edgar Allan Poe that I've hung on my bulletin board in the back. This last Monday was my first time when something happened at home. Two things, actually. I went to my younger son's room to wake him up, flipped on his desk lamp, and the bulb burnt out with a loud pop. I don't think much of it until I was drying my hair in the downstairs bathroom. My younger son was downstairs reading his book on the couch, way out of range from the bathroom. I had a hairdryer blasting near my head, so it was pretty loud, and my husband, dog, and older son were upstairs when I hear a loud scratching at head height on the bathroom door. It was seriously loud, as if my dog, a German Shepherd, was scratching up that high. So I immediately turned off the hairdryer, opened the door saying, "What is it?" And my youngest son ran around the corner saying, "What was that, Mum?" completely clueless. I didn't have the courage to tell my husband until after school break. He's quite logical generally, and honestly I was embarrassed he'd think I was crazy. He tried to explain that I must be tired and stressed. All logical, good-natured suggestions. He's telling me this as he was walking towards the bathroom to prove a point. That's when he found the scratches on the bathroom door around head height. Not gouged into the wood, but scratches in the varnish you can clearly see at an angle. I asked him what to do, and he said to share it with you and get suggestions as to what you guys think. I moved into a house with my friend. It was an old Victorian house complete with a basement. We went down and put some furniture there and checked it out. 2 carpeted rooms with old junk in it, and then some bricks on the floor from the wall. We look at the wall and there's a hole in there, just big enough for me to fit through at a squeeze. A dirt slope down into a huge high-ceilinged room, complete with a shelf and a sleeping bag and a duvet on. The room had been soundproofed, had electricity and water in it, and a huge closed-off fireplace, floor to ceiling. The only way in and out of the room was the hole I crawled through. Didn't freak me out too much. I figured I was underneath next door's house, but the duvet bothered me. I lived there for years with no problems. I wonder if someone had been living there. Going through the education system in England is a box of chocolates in terms of what will happen. You never know truly what you will get. Enter yours truly. I'm a female, white, with brown curly hair and blue eyes, standing at about 5'6" and weighing about 120 pounds or 54 kilos. Your average girl, who did try to be a good person in school but was surrounded by lowlives. By all means, I was unattractive. At least back then I was. No one wants a nerdy girl who barely has the right physical qualities society wants. Not that I could care given the Discrimination Act against people with mental disabilities, as I have autism, though no one will notice, as I am perfectly normal in public. At the vomit pile I will call my comprehensive school, where do I begin? Their motto? High expectations. Yet they failed to meet my expectations of them. It was horrifying, as you're about to find out. Aside from the overbearing, unreasonable rules, low-quality uniform, over-vandalized toilets, as well as soulless interior, barely anything happened at this putrid toilet of a school. Occasionally a fight would break out during break, but those lasted a millisecond before the fight police, aka staff on duty, diffused any and all situations. We did have a few good teachers, like my physics teacher, who I will talk about later, as well as some downright horrible ones. Like my former maths teacher, who I hope is dead, but sometimes the nicest of all aren't as pleasant as they portray themselves to be. Enter Christopher. At a glance, he seemed like a relatively pleasant guy, 6'4", average build, who wore a dark red jumper and was a brilliant teacher. At least, that's what we saw. He taught 2 subjects, geography and philosophy and ethics. I was one of his students, for the latter, in Year 9. The topic was introduced to my school in 2017, and went over matters including Dante, the existence of aliens, various religions, if the afterlife exists, and the paranormal. What I forgot to mention earlier is that my school was built on a graveyard. This graveyard is where the smokers would convene together to smoke their lungs away. Some had the balls to do it on school grounds, but were often caught by teachers. Since the school was built on this graveyard, it's widely believed to be haunted, and a good friend of mine, Courtney, had actually seen some ghosts. I hadn't seen any though, and I do believe in them. Anyway, in Year 11, 2019, I was 16. We had a day called Careers Day, in which we went over our potential future careers. While the younger year groups did a sponsored walk, I was 2 months into grieving my first rabbit that had passed away in August 2019, and it didn't help that I had to go to school. So a day away from the annoying younger year group was most appreciated. Christopher was meant to be my tutor for the day, but he didn't show up, and instead, this lady tutored us. Unbeknownst to us, Christopher had been arrested. At the time, his absence didn't seem anything out of the ordinary, and we dismissed it as nothing more than a minor illness, but how wrong we were. Cut to 3 months later, Friday, 17th of January 2020. Sitting down by the fences in the yard, myself and some other observant students noticed teachers leaving the assembly hall, some looking rather distraught. Something was off. I knew it. Something had happened, and it would be a matter of time before the students learned what it was. I went to sit outside my physics classroom, as that was in a quieter area of the science block, and had my last lesson for the day, which was probably the best part of school. Sitting down, I began to wonder, what was going on with the teachers? Had another teacher died? Then I remembered Christopher had been absent for 3 months. Must have been about him. Rumors spread faster than Sonic the Hedgehog amongst the school. It didn't take much detective work for our students to figure out the assembly was about him. Having lost my rabbit 5 months prior, and a teacher having taken her own life before this, I began to stress out, panicking, as I personally thought he was deceased. Someone in my class had suspected that Christopher had depression, while others figured he quit. There were other ideas, plus the idea he could be dead. None of us suspected the truth. While the lesson continued, my autism got the better of me, with the anxiety to know what was going on. The head teacher stonewalled us by disallowing teachers from telling us, and I was unable to prepare myself for what was to be told in the assembly, and unable to plan out an appropriate response. Later on, our teacher left the classroom while the majority of people chatted. I got on quietly with the work when out of the blue he returned, told everyone to get down, before making us leave and walk to the hall. I asked the librarian if this was a repeat of what happened with the previous teacher, and they just gave a straight no. This didn't help. My anxiety was really taking a toll. As we entered the hall, our head teacher, Helen, began to tell us what was going on. She disclosed that in his private life, Christopher had committed sexual assaults and appeared in court that day, and was remanded in custody and back in jail until further notice. I thought Helen said that he had committed assaults toward people, including children, but she actually said committed assaults involving children. Both crimes are absolutely disgusting. Upon hearing the news, My face was that of a gorgon's, emotions concealed and stoic. I don't know how I could stay stoic while Helen was describing what had happened. We had been fooled and betrayed. A person who had a duty to look after and protect and educate children had been exploiting that privilege. As the assembly drew to a close, our head teacher told us to not speak with news personnel about the matter and to ignore them. That was immediately quite sketchy. People should be able to speak up, especially if they've been victims, because who knows, maybe Christopher did exploit someone in our school specifically. Leaving the hall, I saw two of my friends both crying. I gave them a big hug. I called my mum and told her what happened, and took note of how others around me discussed the matter. Most were talking with friends, ordinary stuff. Some were joking around, slanging about, and I heard one boy shouting, "Sirs a nonce," at least twice. I wished that they would end their twisted jokes that the lowlife scum made. That wasn't the case. They continued on with their cheap, twisted jokes. A few days later, during chemistry, one of my friends showed me a news article that Christopher had confessed to 8 assaults, including 2 rapes, and was sentenced to 10 years behind bars on February 3rd. Now for the creepy part. After Christopher had been sentenced, since school had not updated us after we went to court, I looked at the news article regarding what he'd done. According to the news, Christopher had raped a young boy aged 13 to 14, so around year 9, not much younger than me. Using messaging apps like WhatsApp and Kik, he had groomed the boy while messaging another paedophile from a local area near him. Then the boy was raped to the point of developing a phobia of being home alone in case he was tracked down and violated, trapped like a hunted animal. The news mentioned at least 44 pictures and 47 indecent videos of the child, making a total of 91 on his computer. Christopher had no emotion on his face throughout the trial. He blamed the heavy workload for what he did, and I think it was rather selfish of him to say that. I was one of his best students alongside some others who were decent and produced outstanding work. I was the nicest one, but he won't remember, because he was selfish enough to blame his students and colleagues for what he did. Not to mention that his class had officially been screwed over, because having substitutes the rest of the time really does deteriorate your education. But when you think about it, had Christopher not been arrested, what would he have done? Would he have targeted other children? Could he have planned to harm those at school, turning them into his slaves at his mercy? It's horrifying to think about, especially when it hit it so well. I no longer attend that school. It was never pleasant there at all. When I was in grade 9, it was just a normal boring day at Brooks High School. We were doing work when we got an announcement saying code black, which means lockdown. My teachers quickly locked the doors, shut the curtains on the windows, and I heard some of the other teachers rush out and lock the 2 doors in our foyer. And I said to myself, awesome, no work. I was always like that whenever the fire alarm went off, but I knew it could be serious, and I had to be sensible and listen to my teachers in case something bad happened. Everyone sat at their desks while I sat on a bench seat, which was close to the door, and even though the window on the classroom door was covered, I tried to look out the side to see if I could see anyone on the school grounds through the foyer window, but nothing. The whole school was that quiet. It was the quietest I've ever heard our grade block. It started to become scary and freaky. After a while, we finally got the all-clear announcement and went about our day. At lunch, rumours were going around saying that some idiot in our grade who I hated held the assistant principal up at knife point, and he had a list of people he wanted to kill, including one of my friends, and he was the one who told me the rumour. I think he was expelled, and ever since then, we never had another lockdown, not even after we graduated, and from this day I know my old high school is safe and secure for anyone to attend. When I was a senior in high school, I was sitting on my back porch with a friend, drinking and smoking cigarettes, when suddenly she got quiet. After a moment she turned to me and asked, "Where does that window go?" I'd lived in this house for 5 years at this point and had never noticed an extra window on the back of my house. Amazingly, neither had anyone else in my family. The backyard was pretty overgrown, and we almost never spent any time there. I pretty quickly determined that the window had to be located behind the wall of our hall bathroom shower, but it was locked from the inside and seemed to be nailed shut as well. What could possibly be hidden inside that wall? Why would you seal up a window from the inside but leave it completely accessible from the back of the house? It didn't make sense. This naturally became a topic of intense speculation for me and the friends I had over to drink every time Mum was out of town. There must be a body, or catch of old documents, or pirate gold back there, but alas, we couldn't get inside without breaking the window, and I wasn't willing to vandalize my own home to satisfy my curiosity. 10 years later, the house was in serious need of renovations to include a complete remodel of the hall bathroom, and I finally got my chance. Time had done nothing but sharpen my curiosity about the mystery-sealed wall, and I knocked down the tiles and broke through the drywall. 1,000 possibilities raced through my mind. Jimmy Hoffa could be hidden back there, or an original copy of the Declaration of Independence, or quite possibly the Holy Grail itself. Barely able to contain my excitement, I ripped a huge chunk of the wall with nothing but my gloved hands, finally revealing the long-forgotten window and a bunch of moldy pink insulation. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, kids. When I was driving this one time, I saw what I thought was the Goat Man of Merdy Mountain. I was driving home from work late one night at 11 p.m. The car overheats, so I have to pull into a lay-by in the middle of an empty mountain road to let it cool down for a bit. Slowly, I drive in when I see a white, translucent humanoid figure run in front of my headlights and disappear into the forest. I sat in my car for a half hour, crapping myself while I waited for it to cool down. It was the most bizarre experience of my life. I used to run a Cub Scout pack years ago, and one weekend we were camping at a Scout Association-run camp. It was about 2 a.m. on the Saturday morning, and I was woken up by one of the boys screaming. It was a really loud, really terrified scream. I crashed out of my tent, and as I ran to where the boys were, a row of domed tents with 4 boys in each, when the screaming stopped. I was looking for a tiger or something dragging a Cub Scout out and devouring him. Not that we get tigers in southeast London, but the screaming had been that terrible. But there was just silence. No other kids had awoken, but I'd been joined by the other 2 leaders, equally worried and mystified. I couldn't believe that the other boys hadn't woken up, or that there wasn't anyone crying, but just silence. We still had the same number of boys in the morning. It didn't happen again, and we never did find out where that voice was coming from. When I was in 6th grade, I went to some apartment complexes with 2 friends, and it was crazy. The whole thing was pretty much a normal apartment complex, and then the place we went was a friend of a friend's mum's apartment. I think he owned it or something. It was super big, probably like 5+ apartments worth. I remember the layout was strange. You entered and you got into the kitchen straight ahead, and to the right was a hallway. The kitchen had like a teacup for the dining area. Down the hallway, I don't really remember what was inside there, probably his room or something. At the end, though, there were stairs leading to the bottom floor. In there, you opened an airplane door and were literally inside of a plane. There was a projector inside and we got to watch a movie in there. Next, there was another door in the plane that led to some big area. It was like a big upstairs with an upper floor with a railing, and in that floor there was a big cutout to the floor below. On the bottom floor there was a room with a surgery table and was set up to be a scene from the Twilight Zone. There you would go upstairs and there was some kind of kitchen with a hidden room in the closet. The hidden room led to a giant stage with no bottom seats, only upper seating. then stairs to get down. Then the seats led to some other things, where it was another little hidden doorway, and it was on some railing thing. This must sound super confusing, but the house was sick and so strange. When I was 19 or so, I had moved into my first apartment alone. I got all my furniture from the thrift store next door. They were pretty good finds too. My favourite was a pair of red armchairs that I'd often fall asleep in while reading. One night I woke up, and there was a little girl sitting in the chair across from me. The lights were still on as I had fallen asleep reading, and I could move around, so I knew it wasn't sleep paralysis. She started playing peekaboo, and so I played back. When I removed my hands after the third time, she was gone. I did have sleep paralysis at least 3 times a week in that apartment, but it was nothing like that night playing peekaboo. I ended up finding a secret passage. The landing on the staircase going upstairs was hinged. If you opened it up, you could drop into the area below the staircase. From there you could open the door in the wall, which leads down to the basement. In theory, you could act as if you were going upstairs from the main floor and go through the above to get into the basement and escape the house from the basement door. This house is in upstate New York and dated back at least to 1895. Possibly we thought it was some Underground Railroad stuff or maybe Prohibition related. We did find old bottles of liquor in the walls when we remodeled, and I imagine it was an easy way for people to transport moonshine or the like. Once at the boarding school I went to, I often tried to find out what were behind doors. Once I found access to a room directly under the glass roof. Me and my friends started to hang out there quite regularly, and I guess the school wanted it to be used, but hadn't yet planned for it. The door was open most of the time, but a lot of teachers didn't know about it. Also, I found an attic full of stuff like furniture and so on, but mostly dust. It seemed adventurous in the beginning, but soon turned out kind of boring. When everyone knows your secret hideout, it stops being so secret. I once found a room in the back of my parents' closet when I was a kid. It was essentially a kid-sized hole cut into the drywall that led to a small room under the stairs leading to the basement. None of us knew it was there. The room was all concrete with some 2x4s stretching across the ceiling and others acting as supporting beams from the stairs. It was totally empty, but it was covered in graffiti from the previous owners, and that is how I learned about curse words. This happened around 2009 to 2010, in the Thumb region of Michigan. One of my good friends bought a huge Italianate farmhouse in 1876. Well, naturally, we explored the house. It sat empty for a long time. We found a dried-up cistern under the floor, but it was filled with children's shoes. That was creepy, but whatever. When we started to demo, that is when things began to happen. Nothing crazy, but the lights would turn on even though we knew for a fact we turned them off, and the doors would slam. My friend put some crosses up in the house, and whatever was in that house did not like them. They would get knocked off the walls almost every night, and we began to hear footsteps. The final straw was when this thing started growling into my buddy's ear when he was sleeping. He left the house right there and then. I've never seen him scared before, as he's a bigger guy and not easily frightened. My friend ended up moving out completely that day and listed the house.